Hello and welcome to 1 Week, 1 Year, a podcast where we watch and discuss every year of film history in order, starting in 1895, the dawn of cinema. And this episode is 1939.
Indeed.
I'm one of your hosts, Chris Ellie. I'm a film projectionist. Joining me as always is...
I'm Glenn Covell. I'm a filmmaker.
Joining me as always in the studio.
In a studio.
We'll talk about that more later. But joining us for the first time is...
Hi, I'm Nats Can Fly. I'm a video essayist. You can find me on YouTube as @NatsCanFly, and I do film criticisms. And I'm also a former U.S. history teacher, which is why I'm here today to talk about Gone with the Wind.
Oh, yes. Absolutely. That's great. Awesome. I'm very excited for that.
It's gonna
context.
be a good ep.
Yeah. And it's I assume it's like NATS can fly, right? Not GN.
Yes.
Yeah.
Not the bug.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay. Good.
Yeah. NATS can fly.
So yeah, welcome to the show. Thanks for joining us.
Indeed, thank you.
Yeah, I love the show. Thanks for having me on. That's sincere. I've for those of you listening at home, I'm a big time fan of 1 Week, 1 Year, and I've been following it.
The only one
since the 1800s. Since the 1800s, I've been watching.
Oh, thank you. That's
This is
really
a
nice.
big get for us. I feel like I think your YouTube channel has a lot more people watch than ours. So
Yeah. You're boosting us right now.
yeah, for sure.
You know, it's about the art. It's about the art. Well, like I said, I have a YouTube channel. It's called Nats Can Fly, and I do I have a lot of like historical videos on there. I've got one about Baroque versus Rococo. I've got one I'm working on now that's Art Deco versus Art Nouveau, and I also love to do like film criticisms, especially if the movie is bad. Like I have one up for John's Plum, which is a movie starring Leonardo DiCaprio that he really wanted no one to see. I've got another one for Gigli, which might be the worst film ever. But I actually, since like, you know, I'm a historian, I'm learning about history all the time. Gigli might not even be the worst movie that came out in 2003 because I just learned about the movie Tiptoes.
Oh,
have you heard of this?
I've never like watched Tiptoes, but I am familiar with it for sure.
It's having a moment. I've seen it. It's kind of on par with Gigli in terms of not okayness, but I'm here to talk about the not okayness and the okayness of Gone with the Wind. When I was teaching U.S. history, my curriculum was based on a book called Stamped by Ibram X. Kendi, which is the subtitle is Racism, Anti-Racism in You. If you're not watching this on YouTube, I'm not Black. I'm white. But it was really important to me to teach an anti-racist U.S. history curriculum, and one of my sections that I did was about Gone with the Wind and how it was like honestly one of the most popular movies of all time, and how that popularity shaped the public's view of the American South, and how that led to a lot of problems. So that's kind of what I'm here to discuss. Also, I just finished watching it like an hour ago, so it's all like, wow, man, I'm ready to talk.
That's good. You finished just in time for us to futz with the studio for an hour trying to get it to work.
Exactly. Should we talk about this is the first episode we're recording in a studio?
Yeah,
which is exciting.
Like almost in a way, the first kind of proper in-person episode.
Also true, because the only other time we've done it in person was in a car in Kansas.
Yeah.
So I feel like that, and you got the shirt too. Yeah, this is the first time it's like, oh yeah, we're recording like a podcast the way that people normally do that.
Yeah, and like, I'm staring over at you and you're looking like a podcast guy with like headphones on and like a boom holding a mic and everything in front of you. It's wild.
We're like real podcast people now. It's so fancy and exciting. Well, before we get into our discussion of Gone with the Wind, I feel like we should give people a little historical context for the year of 1939.
It's not usually my cue to cue you into it, but
I know, I'm trying to keep it keep it snappy.
Keep it going,
this is my favorite. This is my favorite part of the whole show.
The news of the year, 1939. Detective Comics number 27 debuts a new character, the Batman. The Spanish Civil War ends in a fascist victory. The 1939 World's Fair is held in Queens, New York. Siam is renamed to Thailand. The last public guillotine execution in France is held. The first recorded snowfalls in Auckland, New Zealand. Nazi Germany invades Poland. The world is at war once again.
And that was the news.
And that was the news. Yeah.
All right. So
You cut out a lot of stuff related to Nazis, right? Like there was a lot of Nazis.
yeah, there were a lot of they
And-
did a lot of things that year.
Yeah.
I didn't feel it pertinent to mention all of them because they're all terrible. And it's like, what's the important bit?
Yeah.
War were declared. You
Yeah.
know, we're not doing shorts, so I don't know if we need the bumper, but feature presentation.
And now we're pleased to bring you our feature presentation.
Gone with the Wind,
Yeah.
the biggest movie of 1939,
And maybe ever.
I mean, if we're going purely by how much money it made, adjusted for inflation, it is still the highest grossing movie ever made, which is crazy.
How are you going to complain about The Irishman being 3.5 hours if the most popular movie ever is 4 hours?
I think that does account for like re-releases in later years. I don't think it's like it made all of that in 1939 and 1940, but because it was released late. I don't know where do we want to start with this big old thing. It's real long. Let's start there. It's what, 3 hours
It's so
41
long.
minutes.
Yeah.
It's my hot take is that the second half kind of blows.
I mean,
I feel like the second half is in maybe the more racist half.
I don't know, man. The both are pretty bad. It is basically two movies. Like I definitely feel like the intermission point is like feels like the end of a movie, and you're like, oh, the movie's done, and then it's like, no, there's 2 hours left.
I can kick off Gone with the Wind if we want.
Yeah,
Yeah, totally.
If you have some burning hot take about Gone with the Wind.
I just want to kind of give listeners. I'm sure a lot of people listening to this have seen this movie. It's one of the most popular movies ever made of all time. It's a movie that has a fandom. People used to throw, this was like a popular party theme throughout the 20th century, even after it came out. And even if you look in the comments of any trailer or any video, like any YouTube video having to do with Gone with the Wind, people are still to this day just like so fond of it. There's all these, people have like, oh, like I have memories of like watching this with my grandma, or this reminds me of my childhood, or like just it's like such a beloved film. And technically it is pretty spectacular. Like every time I see the scene where she walks through Atlanta after the Battle of Atlanta and there's just like bodies in the street, it's like incredibly moving. Like as a piece of, like as a technical movie, it is undoubtedly a feat.
That shot just gets bigger and bigger and bigger.
Yeah, that shot is amazing.
Yeah.
Like in purely like I am amazed looking at it. I'm like,
Yeah.
I'm amazed that they did this.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a staggering, when you think about like the types of technology they had in 1939 versus now, I don't think they could make a better movie now. Like they really pulled out all the stops. Everything is, it's sound stages, but everything is practical. Everything is crafted. Everything is just beautiful. So I get why people like this movie. It's a sweeping epic. The acting is amazing. It's got this love story that I feel pretty I don't like it, but just if you're listening at home and you love this movie, I get it. There are many things about it that are beautiful and impressive, and give it the reputation that it has.
I mean,
but
yeah, but
however,
big old but. Watching it, I did a faux pas and I watched it in 2 sittings. I watched the first half last night and I watched the second half this morning because it was getting very late. Like while I was watching it, I had the thought, this might be one of, if not the best looking movies that we've covered on the show.
yeah, it's
Like
gorgeous.
it looks incredible.
Yeah.
Not just the scope of it, but like the aesthetic of it is really something to behold.
Yeah, at first, like when I was taking notes, at first I wrote much more naturalistic Technicolor that compared to Wizard of Oz and Robin Hood. But as soon as
Oz, maybe, I don't know.
yeah, but like when I started watching it, I was like, this is actually quite stylized color.
Yeah.
Right? It's like it doesn't have this kind of like smack of red, green, and blue that the other ones did.
Right.
But like they're
They're going hard on the orange in this one.
they're creating these like beautiful sunset tones through the whole movie.
Anytime the movie is like doing the sunset thing, which it does fairly frequently, it just it gets me. It's like, this looks amazing. Like there's a lot of like silhouettes and like sunset colors
and sweeping scores while you look at that.
And then the Max Steiner score for this movie absolutely rips. It's so good.
It does not let up. There is music throughout the entire like 4, 5, 6, 7 hours. But I'm actually glad that you brought up The Wizard of Oz and the use of color, because I think that like the main thing that is important. I know these weren't the first 2 color movies, but these are kind of the movies people think of as being like, you know, the first color movies that most people saw. They are both fantasies. Like The Wizard of Oz is a fantasy. It's set in a fantasy world. Gone with the Wind is also a fantasy.
Yeah.
Set in a very romanticized version of the American South. And it is also like, I don't think this is lost on people, but it's about the Civil War from the perspective of the Confederates. There's really only one shot where that's like where the Confederate flag is pretty clear.
That's the one we were just talking about, right? The big crane shot.
And it's the Battle of Atlanta scene. But I was researching a little bit about this movie, and you're probably wondering like, okay, how did this get made? Obviously, people were a lot more racist in 1939. Yeah, it's a different podcast. But I did think it was interesting that David O. Selznick was like, he said, "We are sensitive to the feelings of minority peoples." when the NAACP was like, "Hey, we're not so like keen on you making this," he was like, "Well, don't worry, we're sensitive to the feelings of minority peoples," which I just think is so backhanded.
I mean, I got the sense that David O. Selznick at least wanted the movie to be a bit more even-handed, at least than the book it's based on, which, from having not read it, my impression is that the book is like goes way harder on the like the South was right and the like that kind of stuff. Like the book is way more racist than the movie. But yeah, I think he didn't do a great job at that. Like I think the movie does not really do right by its minority people's characters.
You make a good point though. I haven't read the book either, but I did do when I was teaching the class, I kind of talked a little bit about Margaret. Her name is Margaret Mitchell, right?
I don't have it in front of me, but that sounds right to me.
Yeah, it's Margaret Mitchell.
Margaret Mitchell. She was a member of a wealthy Southern family, and she had many relatives who were Civil War veterans. So she grew up hearing these stories of war. And when she was a little girl, her dad took her to see the aftermath of Sherman's March, which is when the Sherman's March to the Sea is when they go from I think Atlanta to Savannah, and they just burned everything. They just like it was basically like the atomic bomb of the Civil War. That's kind of, people think that the South probably wouldn't have surrendered if they hadn't used this scorched earth tactic. So she was really affected by that. She didn't live through the Civil War, but she grew up around a lot of, I think, like bitterness. One thing I think that the film could have gone in a little harder, and sometimes it's not easy to see these things like when you're so close, because if you think about it, it was made about 80 years after the end of the Civil War. But like there would have still been people who knew people who were in the Civil War when this movie came out. What was I gonna say? Oh, the carpet bagging. Like after, so the first half of the movie is kind of like the antebellum and the Civil War, and then honestly, the aftermath of the Civil War was really terrible for the South. Like it was like I know y'all talked about this, but like what they did to Germany after World War I, it was like extremely unfair financial, demands. They really wanted to punish the losers. They were a lot of people who came in from the North to take advantage of the destroyed infrastructure. But I feel like in the first half of the movie, it's really, it is. And then I also kind of want to talk, like, how do you all feel about that? It's kind of all cased in this like sort of fluffy love story,
like in light of everything else going on in the movie.
Yeah, it's like the American history is like the backdrop for Scarlett O'Hara. Basically, the movie is about Scarlett O'Hara getting over Ashley Wilkes.
Right, pretty much. Yeah,
that's like the final beat, basically.
Yeah. I mean, watching the first half is a lot of like we're going to the ball, and like, oh, who's marrying who, and that kind of. There's a
It's
lot
like
of that.
a Jane Austen-y kind
Very
of
Jane Austen-y, and
situation.
it's a lot of like pastoral garden parties, and like we're all going to the barbecue, and
Yeah.
it's like, to me, I have this sort of thing where it's like you're seeing all this opulence and all this wealth and all of this, sort of like frivolity happening,
Right.
and the movie does never once acknowledge that this is all of this is because these people are slave owners. Like, all of their wealth comes from the suffering and oppression of other people, and the movie never really brings that up. It like kind of, it almost does a couple times, but feels like it's so like tiptoeing around it.
There's one part where the white girls have to pick the cotton. And they're like, oh,
Like, oh, this is
my
hard.
hands.
Ugh, I don't
No
like
one's gonna
it.
love me with these harsh hands.
Yeah.
And it's very like, okay, well, yeah, you're right. Like you're totally right. How they got there is not acknowledged. And the fact like why they're going to war is also not ever really acknowledged. They're like, "Oh, there's going to be a war. Why? We really like war. We want to have a war." And then they announce the war at the barbecue and all of the guys are like, "Yay!"
They're all hooting and hollering. They're all like, "Yee-hoo, woohoo, yeah."
I mean, it's portrayed in a similar way to The General or Birth of a Nation, where like just this kind of excitement on the Confederate side.
Another thing it reminded me of is All Quiet on the Western Front. The sort of like all the
Mhm.
boys going off to war and being like, "This is gonna be great. This is gonna be like 2 weeks of us like going camping."
Yeah, I was watching a video essay that was kind of trying to like position this movie as if it was like playing 5D chess in the way that the, like Starship Troopers is.
Giving it way too much credit.
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was saying like, maybe you're supposed to kind of look down on these hawkish yahoos who want to start the war. And I think
mean,
like in some ways
in that
there
scene,
is
yes.
an ambivalence because like Rhett is basically there saying this doesn't make any sense.
I think
this is
war's a bad idea.
Yeah. Big hero saying war is a bad idea.
Ashley also is sort of like, I don't think war is a good idea. War is terrible. Very southern sounding man, played by a British actor.
Something I noticed in this rewatch, yeah, there's a lot of subtext here. That's a really interesting video. I'd love to give that a look.
Yeah,
I think I want to point out that they say "dirty Yankee" in this movie a lot.
Every time I thought about the
especially in
baseball
the second
team,
half.
literally, and they say it a lot. But
The
every
damn
every
Yankees.
single time they're like, "Oh, those lousy Yankees." I'm like, man, they must be Mets fans. What's going on over here?
There was almost a point where I thought that they had said "damn Yankees," and I was like, no, they're saving the damn for the end.
No,
That
they
can't
do.
be
They say it
right.
twice.
They do.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I guess I did remember that right. Okay.
That's why the sort of the damn at the end is sort of, it's like, it wasn't that big a deal because they said it earlier in the movie.
Right.
But Chris, I want to go back to what you said about the Rhett versus Ashley, because on second watch, this is only the second time I'd watched this movie, was like 20 minutes ago. But I think that the subtext that is a little bit lost is that Ashley represents the old South and Rhett represents the future because he's very business. He's very, individualistic. Honestly, all the characters in this movie, except for Melly, except for the supporting, like Scarlett is awful. Rhett is awful. Ashley
Scarlett
is
is
spineless.
horrendous in this movie.
Scarlett is a straight up narcissist. But at one point in the movie, she says, "I was in love with something that never really existed." And she's referring to Ashley, but I in a way think that that's the movie's way of acknowledging that this version of the South never really existed because it was built on the back of chattel slave, like enslaved African Americans and chattel slavery and exploitation. So I think that's kind of like that kind of hit me this time watching it. It was like, oh, maybe it is like a little more self-aware than I gave it credit for at first.
It's like maybe it's trying to be a little bit even-handed, but it's definitely more concerned with the romance of and not like the kind of literal romance, but the romance of the era, rather than these kind of like very light kind of I'll throw you a bone of saying that there was slavery, There's one scene, basically the one scene where they acknowledge the wrongness of slavery is when so she's so used to having free labor that she starts doing what the movie considers to be obviously ethically questionable usage of prisoners for free labor or cheap labor. And then Ashley comes up to her and says, you can't do this. Like, this is you can't get free labor from people. That feels wrong. These people are basically enslaved, you know?
Well, he
And
says a thing where he's like, I never want to profit off of the like oppression of others or something like
that's
that.
the quote. Yeah, that's right.
And then her response, if I remember the line correctly, is you never used to be so particular or something like that.
When you had slaves.
Right.
Yeah.
She kind of throws it back in his face a little bit.
But then like in that one scene where it's acknowledging the wrongness of slavery, at the same time builds on this like Confederate lost cause idea of like, well, I treated, you know, he says that he treated his slaves quote unquote well, and that he intended on freeing them when they were passed down to him when his dad died, or if the war didn't do it first, which is just like, you know, portraying this idea of these, you know, plantation owners being these benevolent people who actually had good relationships with the people that they tried to own, you know.
Yeah.
And that's why this movie, to me, is so secretly toxic and problematic, because that is the real, you know, the myth of the antebellum South that's full of balls and barbecues, whatever. I'm glad you brought that up, because that get out of jail free card of like, I was a good slave owner, or I would have freed them anyway. It doesn't matter. It still like belies a fundamental belief that you didn't see these individuals as people that deserved the same rights that you did. And also the way that it depicts the people of color in the movie is really offensive. Like it depicts them as like, oh, what's her name? Butterfly McQueen plays her character Prissy. It portrays
Their character
Prissy
names
as
are like pretty rough.
Prissy. Well, Mammy is not a name. You know, I mean,
Yeah.
maybe her
Yeah.
name she was named Mammy, but she's basically named what her job is. And there, you know, it plays into a lot of those stereotypes that people were already really willing to believe. Like, chattel slavery wasn't that bad. Oh, these white people were just, you know, trying to preserve their way of life. And like giving no credit at all to the role that like slavery played in the Civil War.
Even in the opening credits, like Hattie McDaniel and Butterfly McQueen are listed as like, there's like sections for all the credits of like this family, this group, and then their thing is the servants. It's like, they weren't servants.
I mean, I guess technically by the end they were. I would assume they're getting paid then.
Yeah.
But like, you know, it still kind of speaks to, you know, if this were a real thing, right? If this were a real story, the people who stuck with that family and continued to work for them, they probably had some kind of like Stockholm kind of situation going on, you know? Like I would assume, I mean, I don't know like what all the history is regarding what people did once they were freed from slavery, but this idea that they would just like continue happily working there, like you got like a bad relationship and you don't even realize it if you know, in this case.
I think a movie that handles this is another movie that I showed the kids, is the movie Harriet, which is about Harriet Tubman. Because there's really no short answer. I think like different people react in different ways to different situations, and enslaved people of color were no different. A lot of them had various relationships with the people who owned them. Some did run away, some did stay, some did see, you know, like I think it was very nuanced, and it's not fair to say like that they all felt a certain way. But as far as like them choosing to stay with the family, that was also really interesting to me. At one point they're like, we're house servants. Like, we don't know how to work in the field, which I think was another, it was interesting. It was also interesting that none of them, you know, so much of the movie is like melodramatic, and that it's all about marriages and pregnancies and babies. And the you know, the people of color have no auxiliary relationships, no opportunities to have children, none of the things that are afforded to these white people that we're supposed to care so much about. Meanwhile, Scarlett is just running around like saying that she's gonna beat everybody, and she's supposed to be the heroine.
Yeah, it's crazy. She is so cruel. You know, Scarlett is incredibly cruel to these people. Like she, to the point that in that scene, Ashley is calling her out about it. Like her kind of unnecessary cruelty. Actually, no, it's not that scene. It's her dad. Her dad is telling her, like, I don't approve of how mean you're being to them,
Yeah.
basically.
Well, Scarlett's just a very selfish, cruel person in every scene, really. That was something that really kind of struck me watching. I'd seen this movie before when I was like, I don't know, 11. I'm just like, this is an old movie. Go watch it.
Yeah.
I definitely got some of the kind of like historical revisionism happening in it back then. But like the thing that really struck me, I think, on this watch is like how terrible of a person Scarlett O'Hara is throughout the
Yeah.
whole movie. She like never gets better. She doesn't
starts
have a
as just-
redemption.
She
arc.
doesn't.
She starts as like messy, and then she graduates from messy to evil.
Like villainous, yeah. Like she does things in this movie that I was like kind of shocked by, just in terms of how incredibly selfish and or cruel she was.
Yeah.
I want to throw Scarlett a bone. I agree, and I feel bad saying this now because it was so like things were. Is there swearing allowed on this podcast?
Oh,
Yes.
fuck yeah. They're swearing.
Things were
We
so
can.
shit for women for so long. Like they were shit in the 1800s. They were shit in 1939 when this movie came out. It was probably very empowering to see a character like Scarlett like going after what she wanted and telling men that she didn't need them. It was like I want to like acknowledge that this like in a certain time would have been an empowering female character perhaps, but you just can't excuse like, yeah, she's so and she really doesn't change. Like I said, this isn't a story that's about like a girl learning to let go of the past and to evolve and change and like go with the times. It's about a girl who is like desperately clinging to something. She's clinging to it no matter what. Like even at the end of the movie, she loses Rhett, who was kind of trying to get her to like wake up and join the future.
Mm-hmm.
And only at that point is she like, well, I guess I'll go back to my plantation. That's the place where I've always felt the most alive. But yeah, she doesn't change in a satisfying way. She does kind of like her traits just kind of get more hardened, and she does become more selfish. I think the scene where she's like running the mill with the prisoners is like a great example. And yeah, that's another thing. But Vivian Leigh is so beautiful. I feel like people were like, oh my God, her tiny waist. I remember growing up, my mom would always be like, she was like, Vivian Leigh had like a however many inch waist. But I also want to talk about the character
in the movie at one point, right? Like,
Yeah.
like,
it's 20 inches in the movie.
Yeah.
But even that is so fucked up. And there's one part where Rhett is like, if you get fat, like Mammy, I'm gonna divorce you. So it was hard for women, for sure. But there are other women in the movie, like Melly, and who are, I think, it's interesting. It's interesting. There's definitely a lot there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you make a good point there about like the, I don't know, like empowering nature going on. I think like it's tricky because I mean we all are acknowledging that this movie is racist and was racist for its time. The 30s is almost like the time of the like master puppeteer woman, at least in these like screwball comedies and stuff,
There is a lot of
like
women masterminds who are like manipulating people.
or like knowing, choosing a way to move through the world, and the movie kind of supporting that, and then there's this movie which like does a version of that, but then there's also like the slavery aspect too.
I was gonna say like there is an interesting element of like that her dad is Irish, which because like in the North, Irish immigrants were being drafted into the war and like forced to fight against their will and stuff. And I kind of have questions about like the historical accuracy of like, did her dad marry the mom that had the plantation? If he was an Irish immigrant and things were so hard for them, how did he get so wealthy? I had questions about that. If you know, I always love to call on the audience. If you know why he's Irish, leave it in the comments.
Yeah, there you go.
So he was played. I'm trying to remember his name.
Thomas Mitchell.
He's
is
played
the
by
actor.
Thomas Mitchell, who is in 3 movies that we're covering this episode, and he does a different accent in each one.
It's true. I think Thomas Mitchell was legally required to be in every Hollywood movie in the 1930s because he shows up so much, and he's very good. So I'm not complaining. Like I'm always happy to see that guy.
But yeah, it's interesting. Like in Stagecoach, which we'll be talking about later, like he plays a character who is kind of not too pleased with this like ex-Confederate guy,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And then in this movie he's playing a very pleased with the Confederacy
Right.
guy,
Yeah.
which I think kind of speaks to just the ways that the Civil War had been almost like depoliticized by this point already, right?
Ooh, I'm so glad you said that. Because I think that's another thing that this movie did too, by ignoring the root causes of the war and by painting the South as a victim. There was one part where they're talking about Gettysburg. They say the two nations came to death grips. And I think the choice of the word nation is really interesting and kind of like is where the movie tells on itself a little bit, because
I feel like all of those titles like tell on themselves.
Yeah.
Yeah, all of
so
the
many
titles.
of them are like so much more vicious than even what's in the movie.
I know.
Yeah, but I think something that if you're, watching this movie now, when we have like a polarized ish nation, I don't want to talk like too much about modern politics, but one of the things I do like to tell people when they're like, they hear I'm a U.S. history teacher, like just yesterday, someone was like, oh, like what, like what, they were not from the U.S. I'm like, well, what do you think, people should know about U.S. history? And I kind of gave them like my thing in a nutshell, which is like white people showed up and stole all the land, and then they tried to keep other people from getting power for as long as possible, and that's kind of where we are now. But something that I do think is important to look at critically with the aftermath of the Civil War, which most of this movie takes place during the aftermath, even though it's not explicitly about the aftermath, is that after the Civil War and the assassination of Abraham Lincoln, basically gangsters ran this country for like 40 years. So even though it seems bad now, and it is pretty bad, it has been much worse. And I personally would like to see us do whatever it takes to like not get to that point again, because the Gilded Age was really, really awful. And like the way that the defeat of the South was handled was really bad. And I do think it led to a lot of the issues we're still dealing with. Like, and I've been to Atlanta. If you're from Atlanta, like, go you. I was with like a group of people from a lot of different races, and my experience there was extremely violent. Like, I'd never actually been like shoved before.
Damn.
And while I was there was like a lot of very small acts of violence that like were happening to me and the people that I was with. And I feel like part of the like the South still, I spent a lot of time in the South. I've lived in Oklahoma. There's definitely still a lot of nationalism there and a lot of bitterness for how the Civil War ended. I wonder what we could have done to ameliorate that. And I hope that there can be like an opportunity for healing so there's not another Civil War. And yeah.
Especially when we're recording this, I'm getting a little worried about the future right now.
Yeah. I also want to like, be the voice of optimism. I don't think it's gonna quite get that bad, but I do think you need to be aware of just like of restorative justice versus punitive justice, because a lot of what happened to the South was punitive justice. And like I mean, y'all are about to talk about World War II. You just kind of, World War I was, and that's one of the things I love about this podcast, is that you keep the historical context in mind when you're discussing these films. And just like this idea of punishing the loser, that's one of the things this movie does show, that I am sort of like, oh, maybe that's not the best way to like come out of a war. I don't know. Maybe there's a better way. Anyway.
Another thing that kind of struck me watching this is, right, like the impact this movie had. It was so popular, it made so much money, like everyone saw it. It was like this huge deal. And I couldn't help but be reminded of another movie that we watched for the show that is shockingly similar to this one in like its plot structure, and The Birth of a Nation is what I'm getting at. It's like these two movies that were like sort of incredibly popular. Like, I mean, Birth of a Nation is like pre-Hollywood, but
like decade-defining blockbusters,
right? Like, made so much money and were so popular, and people just like went to over and over and over and over again. And they're both these like very sort of like romanticized revisionist history depictions of like the Civil War and Reconstruction, and they're both very sympathetic towards the Confederacy.
Yeah, I mean, Nat, you brought up that like the author of the book was related to Confederate soldiers, and like that was sort of D.W. Griffith's motivation in making Birth of a Nation and the other Civil War stuff that he did,
Yeah.
was because his dad, I think, was a colonel
Something like that, yeah.
in the Confederate Army, and so he grew up with all these stories about his dad, and you know, I think he was born shortly after the war, and so he was trying to kind of make this thing that was like valorizing like the generation right before him.
But it makes me wonder just like how much of the like still current, because we talked a lot on our 1915 episode about like the cultural impact of the Birth of a Nation and how it was almost entirely, it was like all negative. It was like this made the country worse.
Yes.
This movie existing. And while I don't want to be so harsh as to say that like Gone with the Wind made the country worse, I wonder how much its popularity and its influence on films and American culture has sort of at least fed into that idea you're talking of like the bitterness and the like the feeling of kind of I don't know, that sort of like myth of like the old South and that kind of thing. Like
It seems to me like it kind of contributed to something that was already there.
yeah.
Ignorance. It made the country more ignorant. Because like I said, it's a fantasy.
Yeah.
It's a romanticized, idealized version of the South. And I love that you brought up Birth of a Nation, because even though these are films that are being made by corporations and Hollywood studios, to some extent, every movie is sort of like propaganda. And that's why I care so much about movies, because the people who see them get ideas. And, you know, every movie you see, even if you hate it, becomes a part of you. And this movie became a part of so many people for so many years.
And people made the comparison when Gone with the Wind came out. There were like historians and like artists and people that were like sort of, Birth of a Nation is like directly about racism or about, you know, like the Klan.
Right. At least Birth of a Nation is a lot more like didactically just like the Ku Klux Klan is good and you should support it.
But it's like there was one quote, I forgot who it was from, but it was like that movie is a frontal attack, and then Gone with the Wind is a sort of like subtler like attack.
Yeah, it's much subtler, and it's
holds some weight. Also, I think I found out. So there's a scene in this movie where Scarlett is attacked while she's riding through the woods, and then her current husband,
which one was it?
Was it Frank? Her second husband, Frank, the guy with the mutton chops, and Ashley, and presumably some other people like ride out to like go get him. And I was like, oh, so they're the Klan. They're Klansmen.
They were a lynch mob. That was a lynch mob.
Yeah. And it's
that
like I was able to kind of like read between the lines a little bit. Apparently in the book that is like very explicit. Like no, they are in the Klan. Like that's what happened there.
Oh, wow.
And the movie is like very like is sort of like no, like don't look over here, you know. And I think even that is like, I think that was sort of David O. Selznick's whole approach, was sort of like, no, we're gonna kind of sanitize it. It's gonna kind of like sand the edges off. And I think that's still pretty insidious, because it like
in a different way,
it creates this like romantic fantasy, which is like not remotely accurate.
Yeah, I was just hanging out with previous guest of the show, Marco, earlier today, and he was just PA on a Catherine Bigelow movie that's coming up, and I was just like, you think Catherine Bigelow like her movies make the world a worse place, just with like the kind of like valorizing of like U.S. imperialism and all this like kind of uncritical stuff.
I think Near Dark's
like,
pretty fun.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, but it's like, I think...
No, that was a joke. That was me completely dodging the question.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, like, it's the kind of thing that we do now, right? With the U.S. government, with these kind of like uncritical...
That's because the DOD's paying half the budget.
That's certainly a part of it, yeah. But yeah, these uncritical newer movies that that treat U.S. imperialism with the same kind of like, let's just not pay attention to it, in the same way that the Gone with the Wind does.
But there is. I mean, it could, because the past is safe, right? Everyone feels secure, thinking remembering something that they think they already know. It's scary to move into a future where things could be different and better, but since you haven't seen it, you don't know how much better it can be. Yeah, that's an interesting point about Catherine Bigelow. And definitely, I think people do need to know the Department of Defense does fund a lot of movies.
It's like every Marvel movie, well, not every Marvel movie, any Marvel movie that has like military vehicles or like gear in it.
You can't get a military vehicle in a movie without having the sign off of the U.S. government.
Yeah,
pretty
like
much.
Almost any Michael Bay movie, right? Anything with like jets and tanks and shit. It's like you're getting that from the Department of Defense, and then they're like,
Yeah.
we don't like this part where you say that we're war criminals.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, movies are, I don't know, like how people define the word propaganda, but like many movies are made with an agenda.
Yeah.
And this movie is interesting because it is as you mentioned in News of the Year, it's coming out the same year that World War II sort of started.
I was thinking about the Nazis a lot during this movie, you know, like trying to make some kind of comparison of like, what are the, like, how okay is it to make a movie about run-of-the-mill Confederates, right? Like, or at least like plantation owners, and then ignore that fact and just like talk about something unrelated to the horrificness of their main activities, right? Like be about garden parties and that kind of thing. If it were a movie about Nazis, right? If it were a movie about like a regular Nazi and it wasn't trying to grapple with what the Nazis did and instead was just there in the background like it is in Gone with the Wind, would we call that acceptable?
If it was made in Germany, you'd get like arrested. They'd be so pissed. Like Germany has such a sort of like, I mean, I don't know if it's still true, but like swastikas are like banned in any like movie, not any movie, I think, but definitely any video game. Like you can't like, I think like Wolfenstein games weren't released there for years and years because of that. Not even don't bring that up, but they're like anything that could be even remotely construed as like pro-Nazi, they're like cut that shit out. And it's kind of weird sometimes when you see people walking around in like Confederate flag t-shirts here, and you're like, is that okay? I don't know. I don't feel good about this.
It is pretty wild that this movie, which is about the Confederacy, is more careful about showing the Confederate flag than many videos you'll see today.
The Dukes of Hazzard, right?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Just like the poor handling of that nationalism just kind of festered into this bitterness. The other thing that I was gonna say was I think when you were talking about like this movie coming out before, you know, at a time when America is supposed to be sort of unifying, I was really shocked by how much they vilified the Union. Like by saying like the damn Yankees, and all of these shots of the Union, the carpetbaggers, the Union soldiers, they're like these drooling, festering, horrible, disgusting,
which is
short
is in so many movies. Like it's in The General, a comedy. Well, it's not, The General is more an action movie than a comedy, but like The General is like from the Confederate perspective.
Yeah.
And it's like the same thing where they're these like, oh, those nasty old Yankees, they're all bad. And it's like that movie, The General isn't that bad. Most of the D.W. Griffith stuff is a lot worse. Yeah, that's another thing I've just noticed in early film that pops up a lot. I mean, surprises me. It
speaks to the mindset, you know, the kind of subtle mindset of the people making the movie, right? Like if you were trying to have any kind of even-handedness, you wouldn't make the Union soldiers into cartoon like beasts, you know. This is just strictly from a Confederate perspective, and it's from not just a Confederate perspective, but a Confederate perspective of someone who is experiencing great personal loss and as a result of the Union actions, right? She like hates that the Civil War happened and that the Union won because it caused her to lose her quote unquote property and her livelihood. And like the big crescendo is almost like, I'm gonna get my revenge in the before the intermission.
I don't know if that's necessarily I don't know if she's like, I'm gonna get revenge, but yeah.
One of the reasons I think this movie maybe should have ended there is because the first half does a really good job at showing how horrible war is.
Yeah.
One of the things I did when I was in schools, like I actually taught under another teacher who was really good at this and taught like 8th grade social studies, which is also US history, is that you really want to try everything before you have a war. Like a lot of politics is just how not to have a war because war sucks. And I think this movie does do a really good job at showing how much war sucks and like how foolish these boys were for wanting a war. War is bad. But then when you see her coming out of it with like Rhett is just like comically wealthy. He has money from like he has magic money. She's living in this mansion. She has twice as much as she did before the war. I feel like I don't know that like the second half of the movie lost me a little bit. I was like, now it's just a soap opera, you know?
Yeah.
But
And also I think a lot of the kind of like sweeping kind of I don't want to say adventure stuff, but like the first half has like chases and stuff in it, and it's like more
explosions.
Right, it's got explosions. It's got the whole like Atlanta burns down, and it's got all the burning buildings and stuff, and it's got a real sense of kind of spectacle to it that I think the second half is like. The second half is mostly just a downer, and it's like, hey, they had a daughter,
they like
she
ran
died.
out of money. Oh
like,
my god.
I'm not gonna lie.
Okay, that part
I laughed because it's so over the top. It's so just like, oh my god, movie.
It's so
Jesus.
corny. And then when she's pregnant and he's like, well, God forbid you have an accident, and then the next moment she falls down
immediately.
That was pretty funny.
Yeah.
I'm like, okay.
Just because it's like comically awful. It's just like, whoa, movie, like pump the brakes.
You know, when I was watching Last Chrysanthemum, I was just having this moment of like, man, 30s movies really love to like lay on the misery. You know?
Oh yeah.
It's just like just let's be as dark as possible. Everything that's horrible is gonna happen.
People were miserable. It was the Great Depression.
True.
Yeah, fair.
They didn't call it that for nothing. To be positive, I feel like we're doing.
Let's say some positive stuff.
We
about
want to
the
say
movie.
some positive stuff, but
Okay.
I mean, two things about this movie that I think are just like unimpeachable are the score and the visuals. I think are like truly jaw dropping, great.
Yeah.
Both, no notes.
And the costumes.
Costumes,
true.
Production design, yes.
It was stunning, visually sumptuous film.
Which
is also insidious.
Another big like
is it being visually beautiful.
Oh yeah, I guess so. Another big is like historical pin in this movie's cap. Is that a thing people say? I don't know. Is that Hattie McDaniel became the first African American person to win an Oscar in any category for this movie.
It does feel like we should bring that up. And then, by the way, another African American woman wouldn't win an Oscar until 2016.
Crazy.
I think. Sorry, 2000. It was Halle Berry. That was in 2016.
For acting, right?
For acting, and that's also.
Or just overall. I don't know.
Well, I think. Okay, now people are gonna jump on their Googles and be like, this podcast is funny.
They don't tell.
I don't want to get this
tell
wrong.
People, like
it's okay.
2001.
It's okay. Nobody.
Monsters Ball was 2001. I think
Okay.
Training Day. I think Training Day was earlier. I think Sidney Poitier won.
Yeah.
Did he ever win an Oscar?
I thought so.
But yeah, we shouldn't gloss over Hattie McDaniel, who plays Mammy in the film, won the Oscar.
It's the thing, right? Where like I think her character isn't well written. Like I don't like that character has a lot of like really kind of like stereotypical kind of racist tropes like built into it.
Yeah.
But I do
her
think
name is a racist trope.
Right, exactly. But I do think that especially there's like a scene I think right after the daughter dies where she's talking to she's not talking to Scarlett, she's talking to somebody else.
Is it
but
Melly?
It's like
she talks to Rhett and she talks to Melly. She kind of gives the monologue of like, this is what's happened in the movie so far.
Right. But she's like speaking through tears. And it's like I feel like a lot of the performances in this movie, even if they're kind of fun, are these like really over the top, like old Hollywood kind of like exaggerated melodramatic performances. And I think especially in that scene, Hattie McDaniel is like really just honest. And I was like, oh yeah, this I see why she won an Oscar for this in like just in this scene.
I also gotta shout out. This was maybe the first time people had seen other Black people on film, which is huge.
I mean, I
like
in a mainstream like Hollywood movie, maybe.
in
I mean,
in color, like in color,
yeah,
In color,
big
quite
screen.
possibly, yeah.
yeah, in color, maybe like
Yeah.
first ever, possibly. Yeah, I'm not sure. I haven't looked it
Yeah,
up.
which I think is important, and I think it is important that they used dark, Black actors. Probably they didn't think about that, but yeah, representation matters. The Black actors were not allowed to attend the premiere, and I think Hattie
Because
McDaniel.
it was in Atlanta, and the
It
Jim
was
Crow
in
laws
Atlanta.
meant that they could
Mhm.
not go to the premiere of their own movie.
And did Hattie
Um,
McDaniel have to accept her award backstage?
No, because
the
there is
story?
actually footage of her acceptance speech on YouTube, so you can look up her
Oh.
1939 acceptance speech, which is very good. It's very heartfelt and moving and a little weepy, but she couldn't sit with the rest of the cast at the Oscar ceremony.
that's what
She
it
had to
was.
sit at her own table, like off in the corner.
Makes you
Which is
wonder,
crazy
like,
because that was California. That
Yeah.
happened in California.
Yeah.
There was no precedent for like Jim Crow. There's no. It's not called the Jim Crow California.
But apparently, Clark Gable was sort of like very supportive of, like, he found out that there was like segregated bathrooms, I think, on set, and he was like, cut that shit out. I'm walking unless like we change this. I don't know if that's true, but it's a story.
How principled, how
Right?
principled when you're you're in this movie.
Right, yeah. And I think he also like almost protested the premiere or something like that, but then didn't. But there are at least stories that he was like, you know, trying to be supportive on set. So
I
good
think
for
that
him,
shows
I guess.
people knew it was wrong at the time.
Yeah.
Like there was like some semblance of a conscience during the making of this film, but yeah, money is money.
Yeah.
Two very quick observations that I had that I wanted to throw in before we wrap up. One is that this is our second Clark Gable movie. We did It Happen One Night.
True.
And he
doesn't eat any carrots in this one.
He's a fantastic shit eater in
Oh
both
my god,
movies,
one of the best. Yeah.
he is just milking that smarmy grin through this whole movie.
I mean, I think in It Happened One Night, he is like a charming kind of rogue, which I think Rhett Butler is kind of supposed to be in this movie, but he comes across much more of a like, I don't know. He's an abusive husband. He's like a mercenary. Rhett Butler is a much less likable character, I think, than the guy from It Happened One Night. Despite Clark Gable's cheruby cheeks.
Chris, I think that's so funny you brought that up because literally, like, something I googled was like Clark Gable grinning like an idiot, and then I found this article.
1,000 pictures.
Well, no, and then I found this article that says the headline is Clark Gable was handsome but dumb, fellow old Hollywood star said. And then the actor was John Wayne. Apparently, John Wayne thought that Clark Gable was a good-looking idiot. Which I just thought was kind of. I thought that was kind of funny.
That is very funny.
Speaking of Clark Gable, frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn. Right?
Sure, we haven't even talked about that. It's like the most famous part of the whole movie.
That part's fucked up.
It is. Yeah, I was like, oh yeah, this is like kind of a rough scene. Like I had seen that line and like it's in every movie montage.
I was like waiting for it through the whole movie, and I was like, oh man, like this.
It's like the last thing his character does, and it's like,
I mean, that's
yikes.
That's the other thing that I think is like why the actors really sold this movie, because yeah, he's so handsome, he's got such a charming grin, and he is like actually a rapist.
Yeah.
He's bad. He's a bad guy.
Again, is like glossed over in the movie so much, but
since he's so good looking and charming, and he's so he's like cast as the hero, you're like, oh my god, what an iconic line. Female abuse, so romantic.
Yeah. Well, so Gone with the Wind was directed by Victor Fleming, amongst other people. Because it was originally going to be directed by George Cukor, who was fired.
Inventor of the Cukor clock.
I don't think we've watched any of his films yet, but we might in coming episodes because he had a bunch of stuff in the 40s. But he was, I believe, fired by David O. Selznick. David O. Selznick seems like kind of the auteur of Gone with the Wind more than anyone else. He was really kind of running the show.
A Kevin Feige kind of figure.
Right, exactly. But so then George Cukor was, I think he shot for like 2 weeks, something like that, and then was replaced by Victor Fleming, who was already shooting another movie, Wizard of Oz.
Yes. Which he was also like the fourth director
Right,
on.
which he also was replacing someone else on who had gotten fired and had like shot 2 weeks of.
Why do you think that happened? Like, why do you think that the turnover for directors was so high on these films?
Yeah, I don't think that was normal.
Yeah, I think it's just a really weird confluence that these two movies, both credited to Victor Fleming because he did the majority of the work on them, just had really weird productions that were very troubled. Both of them had, very long, very annoying, especially Wizard of Oz. Some of the stories from this movie are bonkers.
Oh.
Well, and I mean, it's not just that like I think both of these movies kind of had a lot of bad luck in their productions.
For sure,
but like
yeah.
Them being
They're also
very
both
early, giant, expensive 3-strip Technicolor productions were also a part of it. That's another thing that links these two movies. They're both very early, big 3-strip Technicolor movies, and both of them had like Technicolor consultants on backseat directing all of the color stuff.
Oh wow!
In the movies,
dang,
yeah.
But so these movies are kind of inextricably linked, just through their like productions, like same director, but also just like weird kind of similarities in their production woes, and also like they're two enormous movies that have incredibly impacted American and like movie culture forever, and are like, they're just like, they're in the canon of just like Hollywood film forever. They're in every montage of like movies. There's gonna be at least a clip from either one.
Yeah.
Could not maybe pick two more different movies than The Wizard of Oz and Gone with the Wind. They are so opposed in just their like worldviews, their tone, their
They
stories.
both involve farms.
True. And also I have even I have like a weird headcanon thing. I'll bring that up now because it involves Gone with the Wind. There's a part in Gone with the Wind where everyone's staring at Scarlett O'Hara and she's like, "What? My face has gone green?" And I was like, like a witch. Does Scarlett O'Hara grow old and turn into the old mean lady in Wizard of Oz?
Totally.
She moves to Kansas. She gives up on her beloved Tara.
Right.
And
because it's terrible. And then she moves to Kansas, and she's like a rich old lady in Kansas who hates dogs. And that's where we pick up this movie.
Let's go with it. The timeline almost works out.
Like Wizard of Oz.
This is how we know you're a writer, Glenn.
Yeah. Where to even start on Wizard of Oz? I think even more than Gone with the Wind, this is like one of the most iconic movies ever made.
Yes.
Just hands down. No question.
Maybe the most iconic movie ever made.
Yeah. Like I can't argue with that.
Well, Gone with the Wind is bad. It's not bad. Gone with the Wind is complicated.
I didn't like it.
And Wizard of Oz is great. Wizard of Oz is so good.
I like Wizard of Oz.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm gonna be the Wizard of Oz fan on this episode.
Because I almost feel like I retroactively like Wizard of Oz more after watching Gone with the Wind. Because I'm like, oh yeah, like give me something that's like just joyful.
Yeah, it's so full of joy. It's so beautiful. I did not expect this, but I mean, I think that part of the premise of what we're doing here is, trying to see these movies in the kind of movie-going context in which they were released. And so because it's still an early Technicolor, that transition from the sepia tone to the color in Wizard of Oz, it moved me to tears, dude. It was amazing.
It didn't get me that much, but it is great. It's really great. Also, there's something really kind of like cool and ballsy about opening this movie with like 20 minutes of sepia tone, black and white, and like even like opening credits, like they're not even hinting at like this movie's gonna be crazy colorful. It's like, no, it's a normal movie, black and white. I'm sure people knew, what was going on.
The trailers always ruin it.
I know. Ugh. But yeah, that transition is so well done. It's also just like really cool and interesting from a technical perspective how they did the transition part, because it's like a sepia tone painted set
Yeah.
and like a Texas switch with two different actors wearing different colored clothing and things.
Is that called a Texas switch?
A Texas switch is anytime an actor or a stunt person leaves frame and then an actor or stunt person comes back. So it's like you see a person like do a crazy somersault and like do a backflip, and then they go behind a couch and like the actor pops up. That's a Texas switch.
Okay. Well, what are y'all's histories with this movie?
I think I'd seen this movie once or twice, like when I was 5, and that's it. I hadn't seen it since then.
More or less the same for me.
I had so my grandma really did not like a lot of movies. So there were only a certain amount of movies we could watch at her house, and this was one of them. So I saw this movie a lot. I've probably seen this movie like 80 times by the time
Great.
I was
Wow.
10.
Good counterpoint. But even despite that, it's like every scene of this movie is like iconic, and so therefore I'm like, oh yeah, this part, the scene from Wizard of Oz. Oh yeah, that line. Oh yeah, this thing. Like it's all so like, even stuff that I didn't remember was from Wizard of Oz.
Yeah.
Where I'm like, oh yeah, I guess that is from this movie. Cool.
My other thing, I've noticed that this film is referenced in like film class a lot, because it's another movie that just everyone has seen. Like it's such a cultural touchstone. You can be like, oh, the part where the house falls on the witch in the Wizard of Oz, and everyone's like, oh yes, yes, the Wizard of Oz. It's a huge, for sure. It's like the scope, its reach is definitely greater than Gone with the Wind. And I also think it bears mentioning that it's probably because it's a kid's movie. Like Dorothy's supposed to be a little girl. I think that's another thing this movie has in common is like Vivian Leigh and Judy Garland are both they both look a lot older than they are, because they were just so like they were treated so badly.
I mean, especially Judy Garland on
by
this
the
movie.
system. They just look trauma, and like Vivian Leigh less so, but just Judy Garland just looks like traumatized. This whole
because she was on like meth the whole time.
It's cruel. That part of it is kind of hard to watch. But yeah, it's a kids movie. I loved it as a kid.
It is funny because I talked to my mom on the phone the other day, and I was like, hey, I watched Wizard of Oz, and I was like, yeah, fun, like kids entertainment, this, and she was like, no, this is not light children's entertainment. This is a scary movie. And I was like, yeah, it's a little scary.
I would remember being scared by parts of it as a kid.
My mom was like, no, this is like kids get nightmares from this movie. This is scary. And I was
my sister definitely got scared of the flying monkeys.
Right. My mom is like, because she watched it on TV, on a black and white TV. So completely losing that whole.
Oh my God.
apparently the house down the street had a color TV, so they got to watch it on TV like in color, but they never invited my mom's family over.
That's
still bitter
to
about
watch
that.
Wizard of Oz in black and white.
Right?
That's
right? But you think how many, hundreds to millions of people saw it that way.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. On TV.
I did never
from like
think
the
of
50s
that,
through the 90s.
Horrifying.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I think that's like a very common thing, is people are like, remember being scared by this movie, either by the witch or the flying monkeys or something else, like the
I was
tree.
scared by the wizard.
The wizard's scary.
Yeah.
He's got a big green. He's like the Green Goblin. He's terrifying.
Yeah.
So even that is kind of like, it feels so aimed at kids, and it's so like fairy tale like in its storytelling, and it's so kind of like bright and colorful and kind of airy, and all of its characters are like barely people. They're all these like archetypal sort of like representative things.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, Dorothy is basically just child. Like the childhood, if childhood was a person.
It's based on a children's book. I guess that's why I thought I think of it as like a children's movie.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's definitely intended to be a children's film, I think.
I mean, I think that
it's for the young or young at heart, it says at the beginning.
Right. I mean, that's the thing. I think that like there isn't anything. I didn't feel like it was like particularly kiddie this movie, you know? Like there's kind of a distinction between kids entertainment and family entertainment, where kids stuff is like stuff that adults really can enjoy, you know? And I think that this, with its kind of like iconic mythic storytelling, it just kind of ends up being this kid friendly but still like kid friendly version of a lot of big parables of Greek mythology, of like Odysseus, that kind of not to aggrandize it too much, but you know, like it all feels like you're saying, like the characters are not characters so much as ideas, right? And so it is able to just kind of be this kind of pure exploration of ideas.
Yeah.
I don't know, maybe I'm talking it up too much.
It's appropriately for the way the movie's structured. It's very dreamlike. It's very kind of surreal and heightened and kind of stagey, I guess. Like it's never trying to be realistic. It's never trying to look real.
And I love that. It's so cool. Like, you know, there are a lot of matte paintings in Gone with the Wind, but then the matte paint, and they're meant to look fully realistic, and often they do. They look incredible. The matte paintings in Wizard of Oz are very intentionally fake looking.
They're like Mushroom Kingdom, yeah.
Or
like, I'd say Mushroom Kingdom looks like this movie, not
There are points where they're walking along the yellow brick road and they're kind of prancing over, and I can see that they're just about to run into the wall, you know, like Wile E. Coyote style. But like they don't, you know, it's well painted, but it is so stylized that, you know, it's emphasizing the kind of aspect of it being a dream because it is very clearly illustrated. So it's like this false world in a way, like with the movie The Doll, the Ernst Lubitsch movie The Doll, where it has all of this stuff that like makes it feel like it is being produced on a stage.
A very Wizard of Oz movie, kind of.
It's got a robot in it.
Yeah.
But yeah, and then speaking of the color too, we came away from Robin Hood kind of noting that the early version.
What if Ernst Lubitsch had made this movie though?
We came away from Robin Hood noticing some of the flaws of early 3-strip Technicolor, right? Where it is hyper saturated, and it looks real, but it looks hyper real. It looks completely fantastical and cartoony, which is part of the fun. But I think that they were like harnessing that in this movie, Wizard of Oz. Like they're so intentional about the color in this movie.
Something else that's like that I think we should think about is I remember like when I was a kid, home video was like for like becoming really big, and so they were like reissuing these movies for like VHS tapes, and I remember seeing a lot of like those frames where it's like the before and after, where it like slides over. So I wonder what these movies looked like when they were released, because I think the versions that we're watching now are not the original color. These movies have been like Gone with the Wind especially has been restored, like there was like a big project to like recolor it, and I think Wizard of Oz too. But I think they were like pretty spectacular at the time. But I do wonder how they've changed. Like,
if they've been bumped up a little bit.
Because I don't know that ever happened to Robin Hood. I don't know that movie ever got that treatment. But I think these movies both got kind of like retroactively recolored.
I will say that like streaming versions of Gone with the Wind and Wizard of Oz, I think look better than Robin Hood. They look like crisper and clearer and a little bit more.
Yeah, I mean,
a little bit better.
I think,
and I'm sure just the prints have been restored more because they're more famous.
Right. I mean, I think that it might have something to do with more loving restoration.
Yeah.
It might have something to do with them not being the first year that there was 3-strip, or like not being like a very early 3-strip Technicolor movie, right? I kind of, considering that most of the saturation in Robin Hood was red, green, and blue, or like the stuff that felt like unnaturalistically oversaturated, I felt like that was kind of growing pains of the process of the color process itself, where I would, it's possible, I think, that like these movies were being restored with like a kind of mindset of trying to make it look a certain way.
Yeah.
But I would kind of hope that they're trying to be faithful over revisionist.
I mean, that's the thing with any restoration, any sort of like digital scan of a negative or whatever. It's like there's always going to be some editorializing happening. Like you're always going to be making decisions in that process.
I mean, I think if you watch the version of Sleeping Beauty that's on Disney Plus, it's like they destroyed it. It's so like, yeah, that's like, because I remember I had that movie on like VHS. I had it. It was actually a bootleg VHS from China.
It wasn't
But-
the
and the-
clamshell like plastic one.
No.
Ah,
Oh no
love
no
those.
no! It had Chinese subtitles, but
Oh,
I mean,
that's
maybe
awesome.
sometimes they do it really well, and sometimes they do it really badly, and I think they did it
Yeah.
really badly with Sleeping Beauty, which is
Lord-
also
Lord of the
animated.
Rings,
So that's,
weirdly has like bad Blu-rays. I found
What
out.
does?
Lord of the Rings, the like 4K Blu-rays are like
Oh,
nasty.
I've heard stuff about that.
But whatever.
But I think the important thing is that this film is, it can stand up to even a bad. The merits are strong enough that no matter what cut of it you watch, it's gonna be a great experience.
Maybe even
Well,
if
The
you
Wizard
watch it
of
in
Oz.
black and white.
Yeah.
Maybe
I
even if
mean,
you watch it in black and white.
I think it captured people's imaginations, even watching the whole thing in black and white.
You mentioned the negatives. I just this isn't really relevant to anything, but I do want to say that I went a few years ago. Actually, it's probably like 6 years ago at this point. I went to the Nitrate Picture Show in Rochester, New York. It's a film festival where they play all nitrate prints, and it's at the George Eastman House, like the founder of Kodak. And they have a nitrate film vault there that you can do like a little upcharge on your festival ticket and go for a tour of the nitrate vault.
Get the VIP access.
Yeah,
ticket.
yeah. I've been a couple times, and that year I decided to splurge on it. It was this off-site thing, so we drove over to it, and I got to look at the nitrate film and smell the different smell that comes off of nitrate film as opposed to acetate film as it's dissolving or disintegrating. But I got to hold original camera negatives of Gone with the Wind and Wizard of Oz in my hands.
Whoa.
It felt kind of wild to hold it in
camera
my hands.
negatives.
Camera negatives, yes.
I don't know if this is a good point to talk about the camera that Wizard of Oz was shot with. I saw it at the Academy Museum in LA. It was the time I went with you, Nat. I think
you were freaking out.
I think it was before you got there. That exhibit's gone now. I think they have a Godfather exhibit in the same spot, but they had one of the original 3-chip Technicolor cameras used.
Oh, that's cool.
For not Gone with the Wind, with Wizard of Oz. Maybe both. I don't know.
What did it smell like? I wonder.
It was in a glass
film.
case, so I didn't get.
No, Chris. What did the film negatives smell like?
Oh, so
It smelled like a glass case.
acetate film has this kind of decomposition smell that's like quite notable and pungent. It is called vinegar syndrome because it smells like vinegar as it ages. And so poorly aged acetate film, which is basically all film prints that came out between like 1955 and like, I don't know, 1990 or so. And all of those, when they degrade, start smelling like vinegar, which is the smell that I'm used to from handling older film. But acetate or nitrate film doesn't decompose in the same way, and it kind of just smells like it's like kind of like a vague garbage smell. That's the best I could describe it, like kind of a musty garbage smell. It has been a couple years, and I don't have the best memory for odors, but that's about how I remember it.
That's fascinating. People always, the movie can only show you the sights and the sounds, but people always wonder, what's
Unless
it
no one
smell
talks
like?
About how stuff smells.
Unless
That's
it's
true.
the Rugrats Go Wild movie or
Oh,
a certain
my
John
gosh.
Waters movie.
Is that they gave you a scratch and sniff?
Yeah,
card?
yeah.
I actually think that was the Wild Thornberrys movie.
Oh, okay. Wasn't that like the crossover, like Wild
Maybe.
Thornberrys and it might
Oh,
have been
maybe.
both.
Oh, you're
Yeah.
right. The Rugrats Go Wild. It was both. Yeah, they gave you a scratch and sniff card. I really liked that. I thought that was fun.
Oh, I was loving it. That was around the same time that I got my like promotional Ancient Mew card from Pokemon the first movie screening.
First movie.
The first movie. I'm sorry that we're excluding you, Glenn, as someone who didn't grow up with Nickelodeon.
I know. Yeah, I feel so left out. So the camera that they shot Wizard of Oz.
Yeah. Let's get back to that. Yeah. Tell us about that camera.
I think I've brought it up on the show before because I was like, oh my God, look at it. But the thing that really struck me is like, one, it's enormous. It's like bonkers how big it is because it needs 3 rolls of film.
Right, it's like
to
3
roll
cameras.
It. So it's
crammed into one, right?
And it's like 2 of them are side by side, and one is like going the other direction, like turn 90 degrees. And there's like a prism to split the light to each of them because they're each collecting a different color onto their film strip. And I was just struck by like the engineering required to build this. Like, who thought of this? Like, how long did it take to figure out how to make this thing work? It was just, and it's like your phone is better than that in terms of like by any technical measure, but
that is super
it's like the
cool.
work that was put into it. I was like, oh man, this is, and it's all like, machined pieces. It's like heavy, chunky things.
I gotta lend you my Technicolor book. When I was at the Nitro Picture Show, they have like a kind of film history museum at the George Eastman House.
I gotta go.
And so I got this book called The Dawn of Technicolor, which apparently like is not sold in many places, and it was sold in that gift shop, and now that like book that I bought is like worth a lot of money. And I'm just like, oh man, like do I sell that to some poor college student or something like that?
Keep it.
But anyway, it's a cool book. It's a very cool book, and it goes basically up until Snow White. It's like talking about the early development of Technicolor, like all the people involved, how they did it, and up through 2-strip, and then leading up to 3-strip, and it kind of ends there.
Cool.
It goes dawn of Technicolor, then like rise and war for Technicolor. I was gonna say,
well,
you're just gonna.
What about, it does not cover Kingdom of Technicolor.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, the color in the Wizard of Oz is
pretty cool.
Standout. It's pretty cool.
You're reminding me that we are on a really long walk here. We just got really distracted.
Yeah, this is like half the episode now.
I think that's great. There is a dog in this movie.
There's a dog in this movie. Do you have a thought on Toto?
Those guys should not be singing about Africa.
Zing! Toto the dog in Wizard of Oz is played by Terry. Was the actual dog's name. It was a female dog.
Very creative name for a terrier.
True. Terry the terrier also played Rainbow the dog in the movie Fury.
Yes.
Where Rainbow got blown up in prison in that movie.
Oh God.
So I was very happy to see
the dogdie.com feature on Fury.
On Fury.
Wait, but did they do the Texas switch for the real dog and the stunt dog before?
You don't see it. You don't see it in the movie, thankfully.
Before they blow it up.
But so Terry, returning dog actor in her most well-known role as Toto, credited as Toto in the credits.
Yeah. And
even I went to the Hollywood Forever Cemetery where Hattie McDaniel has a not a grave but a memorial
tombstone,
and so does Terry, but it's under the name Toto. There's like it's like the character of Toto has a memorial, which I think is I think that's so weird. If I don't know, whatever, Tom Hanks was like, oh no, the Forrest Gump, like that's what his says on, like, he's still alive, but I mean it's weird that it's just like they completely overwrote this dog's actual name. It's like, no, this dog is Toto now, forever.
It's a dog. It's not going to complain about it.
I know, but it's like,
I don't know. That dog could be a ghost.
Them,
That dog could be a ghost now, prowling the Hollywood Forever Cemetery until they change the name on the tombstone.
Very, very likely.
If I were Toto, I'm sorry, Terry. Jeez, yeah, Terry's been erased from history.
That's what I'm saying.
Justice for Terry.
But the character of Toto, I would die for. Terry does a great job in this movie, just being an adorable dog.
Yeah, although apparently they had to do a lot of takes to get Terry to follow them properly whenever they were kind of prancing down the yellow brick road. Yeah, I think I read that like it was like 1 out of every 7 shots that
Wow.
they could use because Toto/Terry was
Yeah.
acting correctly in the shot.
But so super famous part of Wizard of Oz is the Over the Rainbow song, probably the song we start this episode with, in the podcast format, and it's a song about going over the rainbow, and she's singing it to Rainbow the dog. I thought that was fun.
Oh, yeah.
Aww.
But I don't know, this movie's a musical. We haven't talked about that yet. A bunch of songs.
I mean, we're really not going to talk about you're going to go off on how great the music was in Gone with the Wind, and you're not even going to mention the Lollipop Guild.
I mean, true. I mean, the Over the Rainbow, I feel like it's like such a classic, like musical type song. It's like the I Want song, right? It's the sort of like starting the thing off with like,
yes,
if only I could live a better life over the rainbow.
And you have to believe that song really probably hit people who were coming out of the Great Depression. Putting my history hat back on, the fact that the Dust Bowl features in this movie kinda is pretty cool. I think that probably really people were like, oh yeah, like super recent, and like the way they were
psyched.
Tone. They were psyched. It's like this shit really happened, which is, if you think about it, the Dust Bowl is like such a horrible, like unimaginable thing. It's almost like more imaginable.
It's like apocalyptic.
To like imagine it's like almost an Emerald City is almost like more believable than this like ecological disaster. People need hope. I think people really like that song because it's very hopeful.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, if we're talking about the song, we could touch on another aspect of this movie, which is the kind of the gay association with this movie.
Oh.
Right?
Oh.
Speaking of rainbows, right? So,
true.
This may be kind of fairly broadly known, but there's kind of like a euphemism for a gay person to be called a friend of Dorothy.
Yeah.
And so like referring to just kind of the the Scarecrow, the Tin Man, and the Lion. And Judy Garland was in a very early era for this, very friendly to gay people, very supportive of gay people, and I think like it was kind of part of, or at least what I was reading about, like some kind of critics and that kind of thing talking about this phenomenon, analyzing it such that Judy Garland's kind of struggles in the industry were things that gay people resonated with struggles in their own lives. This is back in the 50s, 60s, that kind of thing. And then it's just like there feels like a queer edge in this movie in certain ways. I feel like the Lion especially is kind of gay coded.
The Lion to me seemed 1930s coded. Like
Cer-
this is the
certainly.
most 1930s Lion who's ever been put on screen.
Yeah,
because he's got like a Brooklyn accent.
Yeah. But yeah, I guess just worth mentioning the whole like friend of Dorothy thing.
But like
he gets
bows
a bow
in
in
his
his
hair.
hair. Yeah.
I'm super glad you brought that up, Chris. That's great. Yeah.
Yeah, it's another bow on top
Hey.
of this great movie.
I don't know if I knew that this movie was like part of that as much.
Yeah, it's considered. Yeah, I think. Yeah, Judy Garland in general, but Judy Garland in this movie in particular.
I knew Judy
like,
Garland
gay
was,
icon.
Yeah.
There is a Wikipedia page called it's called something like gay icon status of Judy Garland or something. And then
I love those like hyper specific Wikipedia articles.
Judy Garland as a gay icon. The Advocate has called Garland the Elvis of homosexuals. The reason given for her standing as an icon among gay men are the admiration of her. This is from Wikipedia, by the way, audience.
Mm-hmm.
The way her personal struggles seem to mirror those of gay men in America during the height of her fame, and her value as a camp figure. I mean, we could talk about camp in Wizard of Oz. Garland's role in Dorothy as Wizard of Oz is particularly known for contributing to this status. Oh my God, this is kind of dark. In the 1960s, when a reporter asked how she felt about having a large gay following, Garland replied, "I couldn't care less. I sing to people." So that could be, could be nice because, gay people are people.
That could be interpreted either way, as like dismissive or like, I like everybody.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
in that era, it's probably like it's probably the best she could do. As
Yeah.
far as
That's fair.
and
Yeah.
I first heard this phrase "friend of Dorothy" in Arrested Development,
Same.
and which heavily features Liza Minnelli, her daughter.
Oh, dang. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And watching this movie, it made me realize that like she and Liza Minnelli really have like the same voice.
Right. Yeah, they have very similar like vocal qualities.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't even. It's like Wizard of Oz is like such a, I don't know, like just cultural thing
Yeah.
that I feel like it's almost kind of hard to talk about just as a movie, and it was almost kind of hard for me to watch just as a movie, even with
I can
like
see that. Yeah.
approaching it as like, no, this is 1939. This is one of the 1939 movies. I'm watching it the same as I would of like, hey, we're going to the theater. This is what's playing. And it's like it's so ingrained into everything. It's such a like shorthand
Yeah. So many
for
lines,
things.
so many moments.
Where it's like, so I almost feel like even trying to step back and just like judge it, it's hard for me to even like form an opinion on it. Almost, it's just like, oh yeah, it's Wizard of Oz.
Well,
it's there.
It does feel a lot harder to be critical of it because it's just so, it's like set so many, not like Gone with the Wind, in that they're like, it's like, because it's a fantasy movie, because so many people have seen it, because it's so ingrained in our culture, because it has so many symbols, because of all of like these things about it that are beloved, it does kind of seem like untouchable as a critic to me.
No one's ever remade it.
yeah.
They did a
Well,
sequel.
they did make the Wiz and Return to Oz. Let's not forget about Return to Oz.
I will never forget Return to Oz. Talking about movies that frightened me as a child.
Well, I love The Wiz, so I guess I've
Never seen The Wiz.
Oh, it's so good.
Oh, it's
I'm
so
sure.
good. It's dark though. Like the thing that's kind of crazy, like that this movie, and also I want to like draw out that this movie is huge, but since I think The Wizard of Oz the book was in the public domain, I might be wrong about that. That this is one of those things like Peter Pan that's been adapted in different ways like across the 20th century, and it's still being adapted, and it's also a very popular play. When you were talking about Toto, I was thinking about all the productions of The Wizard of Oz I've seen, where it's like part of the charm of the production is that there's this like cast member's dog that's just running around the stage and doesn't know what to do. That's like, it's like, oh, someone has a cute dog, let's do The Wizard of Oz, and it's just like an excuse to watch a cute dog screw up.
I mean, I could see the staginess of the production with this movie kind of paying reference to the kind of stage history of Wizard of Oz. We've watched a Wizard of Oz movie for the podcast before, and it is very much more influenced by the stage. It seemed more influenced by the stage version than the book itself.
As a lot of movies, even through the 1930s have been, are like, this is really more of the stage thing than the book.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it's never been remade, but it has been reimagined a lot.
Right.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, and that's kind of what I was getting at with this sort of like iconic mythic quality, right? Like it feels like the way that people are like, yes, I'm making this movie. It's a riff on Romeo and Juliet. I'm making this movie, and it's a riff on, the Norse gods or something like that. And like it feels like this is the kind of same thing that's like just baked into our cultural fabric.
Yeah, it's like American mythology.
Yeah, that you can kind of riff off of it in that way. You're referencing it as you would reference the classical literary work,
Yeah.
But yeah, I try and approach things in as much of a way as possible as to look at it maybe outside of that, like when I'm watching it. I think you were saying you were trying to do that.
Yeah.
And so and because it had been so long since I'd seen it, I just kind of had vague memories from when I was a kid. I was just so on board with this, and like the moments that were kind of just cultural, it's like here's the part where they say the line, usually that kind of thing is distracting, and it was a little bit, but like
Not
I
in
was
Kansas
just
anymore.
so into it.
Well, and the line, like, we're talking about iconic lines, like, frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn, which is like taken out of context and is like kind of a nasty line in the movie. The line, there's no place like home, is like one of the iconic lines from this movie. And if you think about it, that's kind of like the theme of the movie, is like this theme of home, and there's no place like home. And then you realize that like it's her, like, because it's all her dream, right? And all these people are like, even though it's a fantasy, they're real. They're in her
Yeah.
life, and this is how her imagination has like told the story of her childhood to her, and it's just like it's so charming. I love it.
It is very like, and that's why you don't run away from home, kids.
Yeah.
Well, can I share this? I actually thought this was interesting because you got me interested in the Judy Garland as a gay icon. I want to read this. Can I read this quote from John Waters that I thought was really interesting about her? So it says in the subheading, "Friend of Dorothy," John Waters says, "I was the only child in the audience that always wondered why Dorothy ever wanted to go back to Kansas. Why would she want to go back to Kansas in this dreary black and white farm with an aunt who dressed badly and seemed mean to me when she could live with magic shoes, winged monkeys, and gay lions? I never understood it." And I think he makes a good point. It's like, why would she want to go back to the Great Depression when she could be in like
She
Lollipop
lives in
Land?
a magical. Yeah, exactly.
It's kind of
There's
like
some
the
more-
Barbie movie. Like how at the end of the Barbie movie, she's like, "Yes, I would like to opt into ovarian cancer." Because like what is real is more meaningful than what is, I don't know, imagined or fantasy. It's an interesting theme to think about, especially now as we're like moving into more generated imagery and like more things that aren't real. It's like this desire for realness. Like, why is that desire for realness so? Like, why does it feel satisfying at the end of Wizard of Oz that she goes back to her ugly farm?
I mean, I think that like maybe another way of looking at that theme, it like wrapping in the other characters is kind of like reaching an inner truth, right? Like finding the kind of lesson that all of the other characters learn is like you have had a heart the whole time, you have had courage the whole time, like you just needed to like go through an experience to like find the thing that this part of your insecurity, you had to go through an experience to realize that like you do feel good
Yeah.
about it, you have a way of feeling good about it
She learns to
And-
appreciate her home by the end of the movie.
by being scared by witches.
Yeah, which I mean, that's what the good witch Glinda says. She's like, I could have sent you home the whole time, but you needed to learn a lesson first. I kind of think that Glinda just wanted the Wicked Witch dead,
Oh yeah.
and
It
was like, all right, you've done it. Okay, you can go home now.
No,
Oh
there's
my god,
probably
like
some,
the Glinda's the bad witch the whole time.
Not
Oh my god,
necessarily-
that's
but-
so
but
bitchy.
Not necessarily
Glinda
that
the
she's
good
bad
bitch.
witch, but just that she was kind of using Dorothy to assassinate another witch.
It kind of does seem like there's some kind of like witch law that she can't
right. She can't act
she
against
can't
the other
kill
witches.
another witch,
Yeah.
but she does
Honestly,
it by
that
proxy.
holds up. Well, and Glenn, we saw that movie that was called Witches that was not about witches.
I mean, it was
But
tangentially about witches.
it was tangentially about witches, but that was the dichotomy they used, was the good witch and the evil witch, and how like the evil witch is like how like the good witch is the witch you want to be. Like Glinda is like
Yeah.
still a witch, but she's, you know, feminine and sparkly and pretty, and you
She
know,
wears a crown.
talks-
She comes down
she
a
wears
bubble.
crown. Like she's like
Dog.
she's like the male like, you know, she's like the pretty one, and then the one with the green skin is like,
Yeah.
oh my god. And then there's Wicked, which I don't think we have time to even. My
don't
big
think
like
so.
dumb blonde moment.
There's
of,
Wicked
like, the
and
last
also
5 years.
Oz the Great and Powerful, the same Raimi movie.
Yeah. Oh man, this story, because there's so much in there. It's like
True.
I think you're onto something about the Glinda being a little sneaky.
I mean, the kind of like negative depiction of the bad witch. She, like the original actor who was playing her, quit because she didn't want to be in this kind of like ugly woman, quote unquote, makeup.
Old crone.
Yeah.
Kind of.
It's like she was like, I wanted to play this character like a little more like interestingly and like less, stereotypically.
Yeah.
And they did kind of go with this sort of, I don't know. Yeah, you got like a big nose and a wart on your face.
Yeah.
And green skin. And those are things that in society you can't have.
Honestly,
True.
I always thought that the Wicked Witch was kind of hot. I was like, no, that lady, she seems.
I mean,
like she'd be
she's got a
fun.
she's got a great outfit. I'll
She
say that
seems fun to
much.
get some.
That hat.
She seems like the kind of person I'd like to get some tea with. You know,
Yeah.
She She seems like she's got opinions on stuff.
I mean, yeah. Speaking of like camp value, like everything that she says, like she's just like she's like a perfect kind of, I don't know. She's just iconic. Her laugh,
Yeah. Margaret Hamilton crushes it, playing like a scary old witch woman. Right, yeah, the laugh, the like, I don't know, the physicality. I found out that she was set on fire accidentally
Yeah.
making this movie, because when like the flames explode around her, it set the green paint on fire because it was flammable for some reason. That was a thing that they thought was okay.
Oh, well, they also had poisonous paint
Also
on,
true.
on the Tin Man.
Right, there was a
skin.
different Tin Man actor who had to quit because he was poisoned by the paint. I think it wasn't like on his skin, but it was like he like inhaled
He's
it or
probably
something.
breathing it, yeah.
I forget what the thing was. There's like kind of an urban legend around that is not entirely true, but it is true that they cast a guy and he had to quit. But then Margaret Hamilton got like 3rd-degree burns on her face and hands and had to like just like be like on leave from the movie for like weeks or months or something.
Yeah. Which
Wow,
they had time
I
for
didn't
because
know
this
that.
movie took so
Yeah,
long to
but
make.
it's like that happened to like everyone. Everyone in this movie had an accident. Everyone in this movie had some weird injury or like problem with like they weren't paid enough, right? All of the Munchkins were like hired out of like the circus and vaudeville and were not paid, or they
Oh my
were paid
God.
but like not well. There was a lot of like,
there's a lot of them. They
there
had to
was-
pay a lot of money.
but also like there was just a lot of like exploitation
yeah.
happening there. When
Well, one of the Munchkins is the lead actor in Freaks. He is.
is it? It's
yeah.
the same guy.
Yeah.
Dang,
So he has some clout at least. He
Yeah,
was
for sure.
he was great in that movie. He's good in this movie. He's one of the Lollipop Guild.
I feel like I gotta like rewatch that and look for him now.
Hell yeah.
I did have
The
the thought
Lollipop
watching this
Guild.
movie. There's a scene in Munchkinland where you see like babies in eggs, and I'm like, do Munchkins lay eggs?
Do they lay eggs?
Because there's like a nest full of eggs with babies in it.
Maybe another animal lays Munchkin eggs, and they
Well,
kind of
probably
I'm just-
Dorothy thought that's where babies come from. The stork brings an egg and there's a baby.
You
in
know
it.
what?
I actually really like that
Yeah,
thing
like
because
it's a
she
dream.
doesn't understand where babies come from.
Yeah.
She's like, oh yeah, naturally they come from eggs. Of course, like the chickens on my farm.
Just like my dog.
Yeah, exactly. That makes a lot of sense. And actually I do like that kind of thread throughout the movie, that it is like this is Dorothy's, unconscious dream brain that's conjuring up a lot of this stuff from like pieces of her own life.
Which I believe was not part of the book. Like the book was
Right.
straightforwardly, she goes to Oz.
She goes to Oz, she
like,
comes
and
back.
it's literal.
Yeah.
Where this movie was trying to go for this kind of sense of
Well, that's
realism. and so they
every
made it a
other
dream.
I feel like version of this story gives it more of a literal, like Return to Oz is like a sequel, so naturally she returns to Oz, not like, I think also Return to Oz opens with her in like a mental hospital because they're like, she came up with all this stuff, we gotta put her away. But like, right, I haven't seen or read Wicked the play. I have seen Oz the Great and Powerful, the Sam Raimi movie, but like I think all these other things are like, they treat Oz as like, no, this is a actual fantasy realm
They do.
that you
They treat it like
visit.
Narnia.
Yeah. Whereas this movie is really leaning into the thing of like, no, this is just a thing that Dorothy made, like that her brain conjured when she was knocked unconscious
Yeah.
by a tornado. Which is a
The,
weird, like, that was a thing that I noticed. I was like, Oz in this movie is not a like, another planet. It's just like, it's just a way of her to like, I don't know.
It's a dream
Um,
world.
yeah.
It's her dream.
Right, but it's
a
her
dream
way of
world.
like
It's-
working through stuff
yeah,
while she's unconscious, kind of.
working through
Yeah,
her
which is what your
feelings
dreams.
about.
That's what your
Right. Yeah.
dreams are. Your
Right.
dreams, your unconscious mind trying to work through stuff.
So I
It's
actually
a
think that,
large dream sequence instead of an isekai anime.
but I think the like, I normally am like the it's all a dream thing is like a cop out and I don't like it.
Yeah.
I do think it works well in this movie because they seed so much of it in like Act 1 in Kansas, where they're like, here's the guy who's the scarecrow. He's,
He's still moving silly, even as a regular
exactly
guy.
right. Here's the guy who's the lion. He's kind of afraid of stuff, right? There's they're kind of putting all this in there,
Yeah.
and then so it makes sense when it comes back up. But
So speaking of those
fantastical.
guys, like they're all great.
Yeah.
They're all so good in this movie. Especially the Scarecrow, I think. Like I love his physical acting so much.
Right.
It's
Yeah.
incredible.
Really good.
Uh
I genuinely believe that he is just a empty jacket full of straw.
yeah, yeah. Which I think he was originally cast to play the Tin Man. He was like, "No, please, I want to play the Scarecrow."
He's like, look at me, come on.
Yeah.
I'm prime Scarecrow material.
I'm married.
Deep cut.
But yeah, they're all like really good in it. I mean, like I was saying, I was over the rainbow with this movie. It like from I was like kind of getting I think that the early scenes, it kind of like eases you in, like you get the introduction to the characters, and it's like if the dog's getting taken away to like it really gets you emotionally engaged in the movie
immediately.
And so like that scary thing happens, and then the tornado is also scary. I think it's like tense, and the tornado looks so good. Like it's such a cool effect.
Yeah, really well done for
and-
like mechanical early, not early 30s effects, but yeah, I think it was like a windsock that they like blasted with sand and air.
But also just like the way that it's integrated in,
Yeah,
like
yeah.
like there aren't any seams in the effects. Like it feels in the same place. And then it goes from that to the reveal, to the color, to the amazing just scene in Munchkinland with the music and just all of the kind of stagey, fantastical looking props and backgrounds. And then to like this really just kind of nice scene where she meets the Scarecrow and all of these companions, and everyone just feels like charming in a different way.
And then there's also Spooky Castle.
I love it. I was like, every moment I was just like, yes, I'm loving this. I need more of this. This is incredible. I'm so sold. I'm on board. And then they went to the witch castle, and I thought that it got kind of boring. But
oh yeah.
But
it's funny. The second it got spooky, I was like, now I'm in.
I felt like the movie should have just ended when they got to Oz. Instead of like having like another 20-minute side quest,
like any proper wizard, he has to give out a fetch quest.
Yeah.
I did think it was very funny when he says like, you got to go get the broom from the witch, and then they come back and they're like, we got the broom. The witch is dead. We melted her. Which, if the wizard didn't know that that's what happens when witches get wet, what did he think they did? Like, oh yeah, she's gone. We melted her. It's like, what? What?
It does seem like a cruel fate, a cruel ending.
The witch is only portrayed as villainous. It's like, the witch is like, we don't like the witch, right? She's scary. Stay away. I feel kind of bad when she melts.
Yeah, it's a little
like,
much.
That is what a way to go.
I don't know if it requires capital punishment.
Yeah. Also, I like apes in things, so like flying monkeys I was pretty on board with. I think the idea of a flying monkey is pretty cool. But they're scary. I get it. I get why people are afraid of the flying monkeys. There's that like really great use of perspective where you see like all the flying monkeys like in the background flying across the sky.
Mm-hmm.
Very cool.
It almost felt like a Méliès, like
a little bit, yeah, like multi-pane kind of stuff happening. Yeah.
Fantasy things flying up into the sky.
Méliès would love this thing.
Oh yeah, I bet he would. Let's see. One other kind of like extra textual cultural thing about this movie that's probably worth mentioning is Dark Side of the Rainbow.
Yeah.
The stoner activity of syncing up the Pink Floyd album Dark Side of the Moon.
I've never done it, but I'd like to.
I did it a few months ago.
Oh, how was it?
It did not work
sync
as
up?
well as I thought it would.
Okay, yeah. Apparently it also worked really well with Paul Blart Mall Cop 2. But, that's a different podcast so you have to listen to.
But yeah, like there were parts of it that I thought like worked quite well. Like it was it was like a really neat kind of way of making a music video to Dark Side of the Moon. Although I guess the way that it works is that you have to like the album's a lot shorter than the movie, so you kind of have to play it like 3.5 times to like get it through the movie. And so yeah, like,
but then like, do the songs sort of like, oh, they're back in this location, this song is playing again? Like, is there that
there
kind of
is
thing?
that actually?
Okay.
Yeah, I forget which song it is, but there is like this almost like kind of recurring motif with a certain song, which is cool.
That is cool.
But like to me, it kind of feels like more like a testament to the ability of the human mind to kind of make connections between things.
Right. I think you can put any prog rock album over any movie and it'll sync up most of the time. Like, I think those, you know, that's just kind of how it works.
But yeah, there are like, you know, the tornado scene is really good with it, and I think maybe the motif is like there's money that plays like when they're on the yellow brick road, which there's that whole thing about how the yellow brick road like represents the gold standard or whatever.
I don't care about that, so we don't need to talk about it.
Yeah.
Nat, did you have any last thoughts on The Wizard of Oz?
I mean, I guess it was really shocking to hear about all of the toxic face paint. And I guess we have to remember that even though it has a charming legacy, you know, people suffered for this art.
A surprising amount. Yeah, like this was a very troubled production.
Yeah, but you know, that's a discussion for a different time.
Well, thank you so much for joining us this episode.
Thanks a lot.
It was a joy to have you here.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me.
You want
Again, sorry,
do you want to plug anything? Your YouTube channel? I guess you mentioned that already.
Yeah. Also, I for context, I'm on Zoom, and these two gentlemen are in the studio. So I'm sorry if there was any like weird, like stepping on each other's sentences, audio, whatnot. Trying to get better at that. But yeah, if you enjoyed hearing me flap my gums, you can check out my my YouTube channel, Nats Can Fly. It's pretty cool, and keep listening to 1 Week 1 Year, because these guys they do good deeds.
Aw,
Thanks
you
for having me.
Yeah, we've considered doing video essays before, but we said that seems like too much work.
Yep.
We don't want to do that.
It's a lot of work. It's a lot of work, but if you ever want to collab, I am totally open to that.
That's what this is, pretty much, kind of.
Yeah, exactly. All right, thank you
well, yeah,
very
thanks
much.
again. Yeah. See you next year.
Bye.
Another movie with like big landscapes in it is Stagecoach.
Yeah.
That was also released in 1939. Not a good segue, but here we are.
You know, we can always segue with another movie that was released in 1939.
True. I mean, that's why we're talking about all of them.
Yeah.
Stagecoach, directed by John Ford.
John Ford.
Who we have talked about before.
Mm-hmm. In the Western context, although it's been
it's been a minute,
something like 12, 13 years since he's made a Western.
Right. I think Straight Shootin' was the last one we watched, which was like his first feature film, I think. I mean, this movie is like, speaking of iconic movies, as we have been doing, this is like, as I don't know if it's the most, I wouldn't say it's the most iconic Western or anything like that, but it has so much iconic Western stuff in it that it's like, it has everything you want out of a like classical American Western, I guess. It's got shots of Monument Valley, it's got gunfights, it's got a stagecoach, it has you know, like the character archetypes are like very classical Western stuff.
This is the first time that John Ford shot at Monument Valley, and he would return many times.
But it just feels like this is like such a robust. Oh yeah, this is the Western. It's got all the Western stuff.
Yeah, I mean, there was a lot of it that, in a way you could call it arch, but like it's done so well, you know.
Yeah, this was so I'd seen this before. I watched this, I think, in my Westerns class at Brooklyn College, naturally. And this was a movie I was like, I'm not sure how well this one's gonna hold up. I was like a little afraid that it was gonna be like, I don't know, like this movie might have some stuff in it that I don't like or whatever. And it's got some, you know, questionable maybe
racial politics.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But overall, I was, even that aspect of it, I was really kind of surprised at how well all of it holds up and how kind of I'm just kind of thoughtful it was. I mean, for when it was made. I mean, I wouldn't if this movie came out now, I wouldn't describe it as thoughtful. But
Yeah,
even
well,
it's sort of its characters are two kind of like romantic leads are a ex-convict and a prostitute,
right. Yeah, I mean, I guess,
sex worker.
it is not particularly thoughtful when it comes to its depiction of Indians.
Yeah.
But apart from that, in just its sort of just general character writing, it is quite complex.
Yeah.
It's basically like a kind of classic style of movie where a bunch of different types of people are
Yeah.
put together in a place and have to figure it out.
Yeah.
You know?
A motley crew of people all get put in a stagecoach, and like they don't want to be there with all the other people that are there.
Yeah, and it's just kind of exploring how they all kind of clash against each other and develop as a relationship, like in relation to each other.
But like, yeah, so much of the movie is about like ingrained like prejudices and like snap judgments that people make.
Yeah, including they're the Mitchell character is
Thomas Mitchell showing up again. He'll show up again in this episode of the podcast.
It is he is looking down on this gambler who is also a Confederate and
ex-Confederate, I guess, at that point.
Yeah, kind of like rolling his eyes at this guy, and there's kind of clashing based on that. Clashing based on like the high society woman who can't, or most of the people, but her especially, that can't respect the sex worker, or the way that people treat ex convicts. It's all like a lot of really kind of interesting social dynamics.
Well, because also
up against
Thomas
each other.
Mitchell is a doctor, but he's also an alcoholic. So then like people are judging him for that too.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh man, I don't know how to feel about this guy.
And he's like, time to roll up my sleeves and go from alcoholic to high functioning alcoholic.
Yeah. But so it's such a great just premise, I guess, for a movie to like throw all these characters together and kind of see how they bounce off each other. I do think it's
really
funny.
well put together.
There's that one character, the ex-Confederate, who's described as a notorious gambler, which I feel like in a Western is like, ooh, that's like exciting and like notable and like kind of glamorous. I'm like, a notorious gambler now in like a modern context.
That just seems like a sad person who's walking around in Vegas.
Right? It's like, oh, he's a notorious gambler. Ooh, yikes! Like that almost seems worse than the alcoholic. But here he's got like gloves and a cape and is like,
he's a gentleman gambler, like James Bond. Like racist James Bond.
But even that thing where his whole thing is about like chivalry and being a gentleman and like offering his coat to the lady and things like that.
I mean, it's very like Gone with the Wind, like antebellum.
But I think this movie is like fairly critical of that.
Yes. Yeah.
Where it's like it ends with him about to shoot a woman like very prematurely.
Yeah. Almost like the Mist situation.
Right. Yeah, very much so. But it's the movie is not is like pretty is not convinced that I think that guy is like right for behaving that way. It's very like, oh, this guy's a little performative and he's only doing this because this is like a wealthy woman. He is not treating anyone else this way.
Right. Yeah, he wants to in the movie there's a point where they kind of all think that, they're about to die. The stagecoach is being surrounded by Geronimo's. Was it Geronimo? Yeah. Geronimo's gang, and so he's about to kind of, with his final revolver bullet, give the new mother a dignified death or something. Then he gets shot right before.
Yeah.
But yeah. Wait. This movie I could see. Do we need to talk about the?
I remembered like most of this movie kind of being the like big chase set piece. Like that's kind of the most memorable thing about it is this like extended sort of like stagecoach chase through the like flats where there's like 100 horses bearing down on them and like there's guns going off and all this stuff.
Very cool kind of like action like stunts of like
amazing
jumping from horse to horse.
Should we just get to the stunts right away because the stunts in this movie are great.
Sure, yeah.
So yeah, there's the bit where Ringo, who's John Wayne's character, also this is like John Wayne's big, intro to movies.
Yeah, he was in only in B movies before.
And
bit parts.
He gets his like big like hero shot the first time you see him. It's like super cool, like super quick dolly into his face.
It's a very
as he's like
conspicuous
racking
shot.
the lever action rifle like in T2, which I mean T2 is doing it like this movie. It goes out of focus, which is not intentional. That's because the focus puller wasn't quick enough, but it really kind of works for the shot. But so the big kind of action set piece that isn't even the end of the movie. It's like the end of Act 2, kind of.
Oh yeah, I guess you're right.
Yeah, so it's got Ringo jumping from horse to horse at the front of the stagecoach, which is
there's
just
like 5 or 7 horses
just
or something.
a guy doing that as
Yeah.
the horses are galloping.
Yes, at full speed.
Which is insane.
And there's also someone who gets trampled by the horses.
I don't think he
real.
actually gets trampled because I mean he was a stunt guy and he went on to do other things. But yeah, he goes underneath all of the horses and the stagecoach as it goes over him. Yeah, which I'm pretty sure, if I'm remembering correctly, is where the Indiana Jones going under the truck stunt idea came from. Was that stunt in this movie?
Speaking of directors who love this movie, apparently Orson Welles watched this movie 40 times in preparation for making his first movie, Citizen Kane.
Really? This one?
Orson Welles, when asked about directors that influenced him, he said the old masters, John Ford, and John Ford.
Oh, dang.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, John Ford, I guess very notably was very inspirational to Spielberg also. Spielberg met him once in his office in a scene that is in the movie The Fabelmans. So go watch that movie if you want to know what went on there. Yeah, John Ford is very good at this.
It's a very well put together movie.
Yeah,
like from like the way the characters work with each other, like it all just there isn't flab on this movie, you know. Yeah, it's very well constructed.
There's a lot of really good. I'm getting really kind of screenwriter nerdy here, but like there's a lot of really good exposition through conflict in this movie.
I mean, you're fair because it's like a total scripty movie,
right? This is very much a movie that screenwriters would like because its script is like so tight and so good.
Yeah. I mean, speaking of another scripty thing that seems very directly influenced by this is Hateful Eight, including like the Stagecoach like first act of Hateful Eight.
Also, just the idea of like a bunch of characters thrown together that don't really get along and have to kind of figure something out. Yeah.
There is kind of like a sort of revenge plot happening, where Ringo is the only one who respects
Dallas.
Yeah. The prostitute, and he wants her to run away with him to a ranch in Mexico as soon as he can take care of this kind of unfinished Western honor business.
Well, it's right. Ringo's, I think, father and brother were both murdered by some ruffians. The Plumber boys, the Plumber family has a beef with his family, so they did some murders. And now Ringo's looking for revenge. And so we get this, this whole thing of like the stagecoach needs to get from point A to point B, but it's going through Apache country. And because of settlers going into the West and Manifest Destiny and stuff like that, the Apache are not super jazzed about stagecoach coming through their land.
Yeah. I mean, it's another like
the movie does not say this part. It's just like, oh, they're Apache, they're scary.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing, right? Is it's like the kind of genocide that is apparent in Gone with the Wind is also lurking in the background of this movie.
Yeah,
and other westerns, but like
it's kind of this thing that's just like.
So I don't know
it's not
why,
inherent
but
in westerns,
it feels
but it's
easier to ignore. But maybe it shouldn't.
I mean, I think it's for whatever reason it feels less glaring, but I agree. It's like there's a lot of context here that is not mentioned.
Yeah.
And that goes for so many westerns that still come out like this year. Not naming any names, but there's not that many westerns came out.
Have you seen Fievel Goes West: An American Tale? The Kevin Costner movie.
Yeah. But I still feel like the movie at least makes an effort at a couple points. I mean, I think at one point they bring in a guy and it's like, oh, he's a Cheyenne. He doesn't like the Apache either. At least sort of acknowledging that like this is not a monolith. Like Native Americans are span the whole country and have very very different cultures.
There's like a sympathetic Mexican character at
Yeah.
one of the stopovers that they have, and he has an Apache wife, and there's a really great line.
Yeah.
Where I think it might have been the Confederate guy or something.
No,
it's the banker.
It's the old guy.
And he sees her and he goes, savage, and
Yeah.
then he goes, yeah, she's pretty savage. I think.
It's like, yeah, she's pretty savage. You know what I mean? And then that guy like completely writes it off, and he's like, yeah, man, like, where do you think you are? Like, yeah, I have an Apache wife. It helps. Like, it means that like we get along with them.
And then I was thinking like, oh, it's treating them not as simple bad guys, and then she like steals all their stuff and disappears, and he's
then there's a protracted action scene where they're just shooting arrows at them the whole time. But I mean, that was a thing where I was definitely rewatching this movie. I was like, how bad is this movie going to be with it? And it wasn't as bad as I thought it might be, thankfully. And a lot of Westerns are worse. Not that makes anything better, but that was the thing where I was like, all right, for an old Western, it could be worse, I guess. That plus the sort of general themes of like prejudice is bad, I guess. I think there's a lot to like this movie, a lot to like about this movie, even outside of its sort of I mean, it's technical stuff. If it's like, oh, it looks great, it's got this and that, it's just really well made movie.
Yeah. I think like with the parts that are supposed to be tense are really tense. Like they feel very vulnerable inside the Stagecoach. There's like a good dynamic of like comedy to drama. There's a lot of good comic relief in it.
Each time they like get a new passenger, right, it's like the Stagecoach gets a little bit more crowded until it's like people are like sitting on the floor and they're all right. It's all these people that don't really like each other or don't really want to be in the same room, and they're all like shoulder to shoulder, like squished in this tiny carriage.
One thing about craft that I was kind of thinking about while watching this movie was, you're kind of used to these kind of wide cinemascope Westerns, right? Where they're showing the landscape as, this giant wide vista, which you can't do in this, 4:3 aspect ratio. And so I thought it was, we've seen Western movies before, but like this is like a Western movie by John Ford, the Western guy, right? And so I was trying to think about like how this movie depicts these kind of classic Western tableaus, but in like a more boxy aspect ratio. And it seems like it uses a lot more depth because that's sort of what it has access to. There's a lot of like really deep shots. Of like characters in the foreground giving scale to the things in the background.
Even in like interiors. Even like indoors, there's a lot of depth. There's a lot of people in one corner of the room into another corner of the room, or like down hallways, or a lot of just like really, really smart framing. I think that sounds like faint praise. Like, oh, so smart. But it's very well composed, which is another sort of like John Ford staple. But even after this like big, standout action chase set piece, which I had to remember it as like half the movie, and it's actually like very relatively, it's like 8-9 minutes, something like that. Most of the movie is them traveling in the Stagecoach and then also stopping at the like homestead where the was it Mrs. Mallory, the like wealthy woman, has a baby. The doctor has to sober up to deliver the baby, so he drinks like 8 cups of coffee and like slaps himself a bunch. And like that thing where it's like, it's kind of funny to see this guy like try to sober up in like 3 minutes. But then it's also like the scene of where it's like the baby comes out and everyone's like, oh my god, a baby. Oh my, it's a baby. And it's really sweet. And it's like everyone kind of bonds over this thing because it's like, come on, guys. We've all got our little gripes, but like there's a baby here. Like even after like the Stagecoach gets to their destination, it's like Ringo, John Wayne's character, still has his like revenge plot he has to finish, and then it's like, right, because like the whole movie he doesn't know that Dallas is a prostitute, and then he finds out and he's like, I don't care, like whatever. And she's like, oh, okay, cool, like, yeah, let's go to your ranch.
There's this whole thing of like, I can't be with you because I have a terrible secret. You
Yeah,
don't want to know.
yeah, and he's like, oh, that, okay. I also think it's kind of an interesting and kind of, I don't know, unconventional, right? It's like we've been building towards his like revenge, his like confrontation with these plumber boys the whole movie pretty much.
Yeah.
And it's like their whole like shootout happens almost entirely off screen.
Yeah.
It like cuts
Which is
away
an
after like
odd
the first
choice.
shot. And then it's like there's all this tension, right? Where it's like, because everyone's, inside listening or, peeking out the windows, where it's like there's like a bunch of gunshots and then everyone's like, what happened? And there's like John Ford draws that feeling out as long as possible, where it's like a gunfight just happened and we don't know who lived yet.
Yeah, including there's like a kind of like classic, I don't know, Western or like samurai scene.
Like
where,
guy walks up and then
like it looks like he's
keels over.
fine. Yeah.
the best. And that's the thing, is like that at this point has almost kind of become like a cliche in movies, I think, but that's because it is great and it is always great. And every
Yeah.
time I see it, I'm like, yes.
It gives you this moment of like, oh no, did he lose? Is that guy still alive?
Yeah,
And then
yeah.
he just falls over. It's
Yeah.
great.
This movie has just like, right, like I said before, like everything you'd want out of a Western. It's got people like sliding bottles down a bar. It's got, it's got horses, it's got babies, it's got gunfights. The story it's telling, I feel like, is a little pulpy, maybe.
Yeah.
But but it's so well done that it feels like, I don't know. I think this is a great movie. And
the revenge plot's pulpy. I don't know if the other stuff is, or like the character, drama.
I didn't really look into how much, like, how this movie was received when it was released, or sort of what the kind of general reaction to it was.
Mm-hmm.
But I get the sense, this wasn't a like prestige movie when it came out.
Mm-hmm.
I get the sense, but I don't know. But I think like this term didn't exist back then, but like more of like a action blockbuster, whatever kind of adventure movie.
Mm-hmm.
And yet it's so like there's so much care being put into every scene, every frame, because John Ford was good at his job.
Every frame was a painting.
Yeah, a painting with the horizon either at the top or the bottom.
But yeah, the doctor in this movie,
Thomas Mitchell.
He has another accent in another movie.
Indeed, he does. Our third Thomas Mitchell picture of the episode.
Frank Capra's Mr. Smith Goes to Washington.
Another classic.
Which is another classic, and which may as well be called Mr. Deeds Goes to Washington.
Well, funny story, it was originally.
Was it?
Yes.
Oh.
It was originally conceived. I think it might be like somewhat based on like another story, but it was initially going to be a sequel to Mr. Deeds Goes to Town, called Mr. Deeds Goes to Washington.
Oh, wow.
And it was like, yeah, it's like this happens again.
Yeah, I mean, there are so many beats in this movie that are exactly the same.
It's
as
like
Mr.
almost
Deeds Goes
a
to
remake.
Town. Yeah, it's almost a remake like 2 years later
with some of the same actors playing like almost the same role. Yeah.
But
I don't know. I think this is better than Mr. Deeds Goes to Town. Personally, I think that Jimmy Stewart kind of plays this kind of naive, but like really good-hearted guy.
Yeah, he doesn't play him as dumb and weird as Mr. Deeds.
No, he a little bit. I mean, that's still there.
He's earnest,
but it's like he's more earnest. I almost feel like
he's just as easily distractible and easily compelled into violence.
Right, that was the other thing I forgot about this movie. He goes on like a whole punching rampage halfway through.
He goes around,
which I guess is just a Frank Capra thing.
Yeah, fisticuffs solve everything.
Yeah. Something I noticed right off the bat, opening credits, montages by Slavko Vorkapich. Vorkapich? Not sure how you pronounce his last name.
No one knows.
Yeah. I think that's very cool that this guy's still getting work doing like wacky montage stuff. in movies
Yeah.
after having done like all these kind of like little experimental movies earlier. I'd seen this movie before. This movie was actually one of if not the first movie ever watched like with an analytical eye.
Oh.
There was like a whole dossier or whatever that my mom got in the mail, like mailed away for, that was like, how to teach like film studies, and it was all based around Mr. Smith Goes to Washington.
Wow.
And so it had all this stuff of just like, what is the dialogue saying?
Back
what,
before
what...
the internet was big, when you had to get mail order dossiers.
Honestly, it might have been from the internet. I don't know. This was like, I don't know. I was like 12, so like 2003. But so it was part of my homeschool curriculum, was watching Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, and like critically like breaking it down and like watching every scene and like being very analytical about it.
What did you get out of it back then?
I think I don't remember like specifics, but I think I did get a real sense of like film analysis and just like how much intention is put into every detail, and how much of it kind of adds up without you even noticing it. Where it's like, oh yeah, we understand all of these things about the movie, just kind of it feels like just intrinsically, but then you break it down. It's like, no, we know this because this piece of information is laid out early in the movie, and then it comes back, and we know that because we remember from earlier. And like, there's just screenwriting, like set design, cinematography, like this covered all of it. Yeah. And so I don't know. I have a certain sort of affinity for this movie. I don't love this movie, but I think it's very good, and I enjoy it a lot. I think this was another one where I was like, how well is this one going to hold up, though? Like, ooh, I don't know. It's
right.
He goes to Washington. I don't like Washington.
Somebody call the circus, because all the clowns are in Washington.
And it's like, this movie has a whole montage of Jefferson Smith just like going on Washington, being like, oh my God, the Lincoln Memorial. Oh my God, the Washington Memorial.
Yeah,
oh my God, the Capitol Dome.
Like, maybe this is the Vorkapich montage, but like a kind of like very America core, like
Stars and Stripes,
liberty, freedom, like montage. And I'm like, it's a bit much. It
is a bit much, but somehow this movie, I'm like, yeah, okay. Like, I not necessarily, I don't feel this outpouring of like patriotism and like, oh, isn't America beautiful?
Yeah.
But I think that the movie is so earnest about it, and so kind of yet still having a fairly cynical overall viewpoint of like how politics function.
Right.
That I feel like I can't help but like really like this movie.
I mean, I think that Capra didn't intend this movie to be cynical. I think, like,
I don't know.
This movie
is showing
overall. This movie is showing how the glorious American political process can root out any corruption that exists in it, because there are passionate people who have avenues like the filibuster to make that happen.
Let's get it out of the way. Biggest gripe of the movie: the filibuster in real life fucking sucks and is terrible and just shouldn't exist anymore. It also doesn't function the way it does in this movie. So there's that, where it's like, I don't know if it did in 1939 even. So I do not condone the filibuster as a thing. I think it's bad. But the scene, pretty great. The scene of him, with the scratchy throat and like leaning over and reading letters and stuff. I feel like tired, angry James Stewart is the best version of him. When he's just like, he's like a little sweaty and his hair's kind of floppy and he's just like passionately yelling about something.
I think Broken Leg's creepy version of James Stewart is the best one. This movie is about like a kind of corruption plot. For graft.
And they want to build a dam.
An earnest Boy Scout leader, the literal Boy Scout.
They couldn't use the actual organization Boy Scout, so I think he's what is he called? It's like, it's something similar. Boy Rangers.
The Boy Rangers.
Yeah.
He's kind of put in place of a senator.
Right. Well, a senator dies. Opening scene, much like a rich person dies in Mr. Deeds, and it's like, we got to fill the seat. What idiot can we throw in here? What rube? What stooge can we put that we can control?
Manipulated. Yeah.
Exactly. and like it's like this one guy's kids are like, dude, Dad, Jefferson Smith, he's the best. He's the Boy Rangers leader. We gotta put him in there.
Yeah, they're Brooklyn kids from no name states.
Yeah. Another weird thing, other than like the location of Washington D.C., like no states are mentioned.
No states, no political parties.
Or political parties. This
Yeah.
movie is very vague about a lot of things.
Yes.
Which helps it work.
It's like it's conspicuous how vague it is.
Yeah.
but
Especially
it's
now.
Also,
but like
but it's also like, how are you gonna make this movie not be vague?
Well, I mean,
you know?
I don't know. I off topic, but I rewatched Independence Day recently.
Mm-hmm.
Another movie.
You watched Independence Day on July 4th. I watched this movie on July 4th.
Oh boy, both thematic. Independence Day. I was like trying to figure out, like, is the president in Independence Day Democrat or Republican? It's impossible to tell. It's genuinely impossible. But I also feel like in 1996 it like wasn't as big a deal.
Well, he hates aliens.
He does. Yeah.
So
and he was
that gives you an idea.
And he was in the Air Force. So I do kind of lean Republican on President Whitmore from Independence Day. But so they get this guy, this like Boy Scout leader. They go to his house, which is full of like bands playing and chaos, which that's like a Frank Capra thing I'm noticing, is he loves like a chaotic living room.
This is full of so many Capra hallmarks.
This is like one of the most Capra-y movies that exists. I think it's like this and It's a Wonderful Life are like kind of his two biggest or like most well-known movies.
Yeah, this movie really, maybe I'm being a little too unfair to it in and of itself. But it's just because we just watched Mr. Deeds and it's the exact same movie.
Well, also,
and like
Jean Arthur is in both, playing basically the same character.
Yeah.
Right? She has a different name, but she's the like cynical, like more worldly kind of woman who falls for the earnest, good-hearted rube. Stooge, I should say. They say stooge in this movie a lot. They're always calling people stooges, which I think is funny.
But like this movie just seems like the crescendo of every little Capra hallmark that you can find.
It's him just like pulling it all together into one thing. Just like this is the ultimate Capra film.
Yeah. America, instruments, easily distracted
stooges.
Easily distracted stooge who likes to punch people.
But is also, so earnest and good-hearted. He just wants the best from the world. And then Jean Arthur's there like, yeah, buddy, take a hike. Thomas Mitchell in this plays a, I think also heavy drinking reporter who is equally cynical and has a sort of change of heart towards the end of the movie also.
Yeah, he's a buddy with Jean Arthur's character.
Another thing about Frank Capra movies, weirdly antagonistic towards the press.
Antagonistic toward the press. I mean, antagonistic toward rich people, which based,
Yeah.
And that is part of why, this movie was screened for like American politicians, like a group of American politicians, and they got mad about it.
Yeah, I wonder why. Because this movie posits that there is a lot of, or at least, I don't know if it posits there's a lot of corruption, but it's like the main plot of the movie is about corrupt politicians trying to like lie to their constituents.
Yeah, and also like even the non-corrupt politicians standing behind someone who is, their coworker and friend,
Yeah. I think this movie, like you were saying, like you don't think Frank Capra set out to make a cynical movie. I don't think he did either. But I think this movie is like, I think the ultimate point that I think my takeaway from it is that it is about like the American system of government is not necessarily broken, but is like super filled with corruption and problems, but that there is this like hopeful, right? Frank Capra is like, no, but if it could just work properly, then we'd all be okay, kind of.
I think what he's saying is that we all like the more that the system works, it's like it's not like it's set up so that it's impossible for things to go wrong.
Right.
But if you believe in America hard enough, then any kind of cancerous object can be cut out of the politics of America,
Right.
using the beautiful checks and balances process and everything like
Yeah.
that.
Which I mean,
It
that
is
in of itself
a
might
version
be a little naive. I don't know.
yeah, I mean it's the version of America that we are taught when we're younger, right?
Yes, very much so.
And it is
By this movie.
yeah, it's a naive perspective. Like it is
I kind of think so. I mean,
it is.
we've it's been a rough couple of years for America lately. But I do just like there is something so kind of hopeful and like optimistic about this movie that is
Yeah.
it's hard to watch this movie and be a complete cynic about it.
Yeah, I was kind of like battling
the movie
cynicism
itself, not
back and
necessarily
forth
the
while
systems of
watching this
government.
movie.
But yeah, I think I kind of went into this movie feeling kind of more cynical and came out of it being like, yeah, but Frank Capra, man.
Yeah.
And Frank,
Yeah.
I don't know, I was reading up on Frank Capra. Like he was born in Italy and immigrated to the United States, during the kind of big immigration period of time. Went to Ellis Island, classic stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And so like I do kind of appreciate his perspective of someone who like immigrated to the United States and was like, oh my God, it is so much better here. And the fact that he went from being like, he genuinely did just like come from, not necessarily, I don't know if he was necessarily living in poverty, but like he worked his way up through early Hollywood and like became a really successful director.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like, if there's anyone whose perspective on this I feel like holds at least a little bit of weight, it is like Frank Capra is sort of like, no, guys, like if we cannot, like if this can work out, it actually is good,
Yeah. Yeah, I feel so cynical about America.
I mean,
that, like sometimes
honestly,
like,
same.
it's
same.
hard to
It's hard not to.
It's hard not to, but I mean, I think if I saw this movie as a kid before I was that cynical, I would have been like, "Yes, this is awesome. This is so cool. This is what makes us good."
Yeah.
And there are aspects of truth to it. There are ways that America is good.
Yeah, there's a
I
few.
must admit.
Yeah. I guess.
There are a couple of like really interesting formal things in this movie, I thought. Or like one of them is when during the kind of climactic filibuster scene, while he's filibustering, there's all of this kind of like the news industry and like the kind of owners of like culture, or not, I don't know, like the kind of powerful barons who own the world, like who are the ones who are kind of involved in this bribery plot. Like he's trying to like seed all of the newspapers in his hometown with anti Jefferson Smith like sentiment.
Right, because there's Taylor, the like industrialist villain of the movie, who's like trying to build a dam and is like paying off politicians and things to get his way, to make more money for his businesses. Right, he owns all of the press in Jefferson Smith's home state. They never say what it is. It's kind of implied, I think, at one point to be either Montana or somewhere else.
Well, the original
That's
story
what it is.
that it's based on is it's Montana.
And so he's like, he's like putting out all these, all the big city newspapers are like, Jefferson Smith is a fraud and a scam artist and is involved in corruption. And then there's this whole grassroots sort of boy rangers led campaign to like, no, like Jefferson Smith is the only one like speaking the truth, and like it's Taylor, the guy who's like runs all this stuff, is actually the liar. And then Taylor sends his like hatchet men to go like slap around a bunch of children and like drive their cars off the road and like crazy.
But the formal thing that I think is neat is like this kind of juxtaposition between him kind of hoarsely and weakly like reading the US Constitution, and it cuts back and forth between that and like the paper printing machines that the industrialist owns, and so it's like him fighting against the industrial political machine, right? Like, and it's like kind of David and Goliath situation, but like it's literally like the machine that he's against. And then like, this is probably not unique to this movie, but I felt like there were some good kind of uses of like more than other movies. This is one that is just a lot of people talking to each other. It's like a lot of shots of two people speaking to each other, and so they do a lot of like neat stuff with like positioning people like height wise in the frame to like imply like a like dominance in like a certain part of a scene. There's a part where he like Mr. Smith is trying to be pressured into going along with the bribery stuff, and then there are like two people kind of looming over him on either side of the frame. It's all good stuff that I like. There's another scene too where he's like very nervous talking to the
I was gonna bring
lady.
this up next.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Well, just he's really nervous talking to a pretty lady, and he's having this whole conversation with her, but the camera does not focus on either of their faces. It is only showing his nervous hands holding his hat as he's like moving the hat around his hands. He drops the hat and he has to pick the hat up, and it's just showing the hat.
Yeah, which is such a nice touch. It's really good
because it's like the whole scene is playing out just in how he's holding his hat.
Yeah,
which is great. Like the dialogue almost doesn't even matter at that point.
I saw that and I was like, no movie nowadays would do that. You know, like
I feel like someone who's like really, I don't know, adventurous or cool. Like I feel like Soderbergh or somebody might do something like that.
Like a mainstream movie.
That actually also, I just rewatched Ocean's 11 also, and there is a bit in that's why I said Soderbergh. It's because there is a bit in that where it focuses entirely just on the cart that's supposed to be full of money, but there's actually a guy in there. And there's all this dialogue happening. The camera is staying on the cart the whole time because it's like that's what's important in the scene.
Yeah. It's just like such a cool choice to to like emphasize his nervousness and like the kind of narrative that it tells about his nervousness by like how his hands are moving in that scene. It's really cool.
Yeah. I also just kind of love how 1930s this movie is. It's got a lot of just kind of 1930s charm to it. The Jean Arthur character is was it Saunders is like such a 1930s character.
Yeah. Like she was in the last movie where she played
different
the same
name
character.
but like same exact character basically.
She's like a bit less of a hardened cynic in this movie.
Right, yeah. A little bit less antagonistic maybe. Thomas Mitchell once again. I feel like he's having kind of maybe the most fun in this movie because he has kind of the smallest ish role and he just kind of gets to hang around and like
he's being a hammy newspaper guy.
Yeah,
he's like
the best. I love a hammy newspaper guy. Also, didn't even mention Claude Rains also in this movie as like the mentor of Jefferson Smith, who is actually the one who is being paid off and is like going along with all this corruption. Who at one point gives this whole kind of speech where it's like, yes, this is just how it works. We have to go along with all the payouts and this stuff, and we have to do what the industrialists tell us. And then that's our way of getting other stuff done, right? Like if we do all that stuff, we play their game, we can then also pass our own bills and things like that.
Which is an entirely accurate way,
right?
An accurate depiction of how every person in Congress right now thinks.
But I thought that was interesting that it's like that character is kind of acknowledged. It's like, yeah, I know that this isn't good, but it's like this is like we have to compromise. He keeps saying,
life, yeah,
right. And I do kind of appreciate how much the movie is like, fuck that, like that's bullshit.
Yeah,
like that's terrible. Why? No, we shouldn't let that happen. And so that I appreciate that about it. Also, Claude Rains, the best.
He knows how to play evil.
He does, but it's like even this movie, he's a pretty sympathetic villain.
Yeah,
I think.
Yeah, I mean,
you can see like kind of the gears turning in him and how kind of conflicted he is.
One of the most unrealistic things about this movie, besides like an earnest Boy Scout winning the hearts of everyone, is that he is able to win over Claude Rains, basically.
Right.
Like,
yeah.
Like the kind of premise of all of this is that you can appeal to the morals of the people who are ruining the world if you're earnest and nice enough, you know? And that's just not true. The people who are ruining the world and doing bad things.
Well, it's like that's what they want to do.
Yeah.
Like that's not a byproduct. That's like no, that they're doing that on purpose.
Yeah. And so like, it not to get like too modern day political or whatever, but it's like the Democrats are people who are like, yes, we can like appeal to the better senses of people who are not like acting with their senses, you know. And it's so naive, and like it just feels like, you know, it's a fun scene when his efforts finally cut to the heart of Claude Rains's character, senator character, and so he's just like, I've been a bad guy, I'm going to shoot myself now, which is very dramatic, very very cool. But like, there's no way that happens in the real world. Somebody who has been deeply embedded in corruption for 20 years is not going to have a change of heart.
Well, much like Wizard of Oz and Gone with the Wind, I think this is kind of a fantastical view of, like, you know, what if the system did work, kind of, you know.
It's just that in the ranking of like how culturally harmful the fantasy is, I would say it's like Wizard of Oz, not harmful. This one, a little bit harmful. Gone with the Wind, quite harmful.
Right, yeah. That's a good hierarchy. Also, then the movie ends immediately. There was like zero like denouement or sort of like wrap up. It's just sort of like, and then he confessed, the end.
Yeah.
Like, people cheer. We're like, credits after cheering. Like, there is no sense of like, I think Jefferson Smith is unconscious at the end of the movie, and it's like, we never find out what happened to him.
Presumably everyone loves him and is happy.
Yeah, he was elected president of the United States and served 8 terms, and World War II never happened. Anything else to say about Mr. Smith Goes to Washington?
No.
Okay, so our final film of the episode, we wanted to get outside of Hollywood for this one. We were like, too many Hollywood movies in a row. What else is going on in the world? Movies are being made all over the world.
Yeah. Have you ever heard of a little country called Japan?
Yeah, it's about to get real prominent on the world stage in the news segment.
Oh God, yeah.
Which I think that's kind of an interesting thing about this movie, is thinking about it being made in like militarized Imperial Japan, right?
Yeah.
I was almost like kind of trying to like look for things of like, was it like trying to comment on like the state of the world? I don't know. I couldn't see anything in this movie, but I'm also not as familiar with sort of that era of Japanese culture or Japanese culture in general. I've never been there. But the movie that we watched is The Story of the Last Chrysanthemum, directed by Kenji Mizuguchi.
Yes. And yeah, I'd heard about Mizuguchi like back in college. Like,
yeah, I definitely had heard the name.
Definitely like one of those Criterion type people.
Yeah.
We watched this on the Criterion channel.
Yeah, of course. I feel like there's like, in terms of especially 20th century Japanese filmmakers, it's like Kurosawa, number 1. Like, he's the one that everyone likes and knows the most.
Yeah.
And then like Ozu, right? Ozu's like a little bit more Criterion core, a little bit deeper cuts. And then it's like Mizuguchi is like the real like Criterion people know Mizuguchi. And I feel like that kind of so this is the only Mizuguchi movie I've seen. I think the only Ozu movie I've seen is the one that we did on the show.
Yeah, but I'm excited to get to both of their later movies.
And then I've seen like a bunch of Kurosawa stuff. But I do think it's funny that Kurosawa makes like these like historical like adventure movies and like Shakespeare adaptations. Ozu makes these like really kind of kind of heartfelt like dramas.
Yeah.
And then it seems like Mizuguchi makes the most depressing movies ever made. And like that goes for this movie. And then reading up on him, it seems like that was his shtick, was like all of his movies are just like, Jesus, man, this is rough.
Yeah, I haven't seen any of his other movies, but this definitely like has some kind of what was it? We saw that one by Mikio Naruse, which was like another the other.
That was the one about the like, were they sisters who like one moves away and then that one was a rough set
or something. But it's like they
I didn't love that one.
They both really lay on the misery.
Oh yeah.
Know? This one is about a kind of a nepo baby actor.
I don't know if he has seen, because he's I guess he's a nepo baby actor. I find the nepo baby thing kind of almost needlessly cruel sometimes. I'm just like, who cares?
But I mean, in this case, like, it is very clearly his association with his parents.
That's like a big plot point
that is allowing him to succeed when he is not a good actor. in Kabuki theater. They keep hammering that home. And then he kind of falls in love with the first person who's honest to him and says says to his face, you stink.
He asks,
buddy.
"Was I bad?" And she says, "You were." She's like, "Sorry, but like you were really bad. Like really bad."
And so he kind of follows her and kind of tries to change his name and work his way back up.
Well, he
and
immediately falls in love with this woman because she's honest with him.
Yeah.
Which no one else has been like his entire life, it seems like.
Mhm.
And then his family is like, well, no, she's a maid. That's not allowed. Also, she's fired.
Yeah.
And he's like, screw you guys. I'm going to make my own name for myself as an actor. I'm going to go move away, go to Osaka because he's living in Tokyo. And, you know, I'll build my own life for myself. And then, you know, that turns out to be a lot more difficult than he initially thought it would be. And eventually, Otoku, the woman he fell in love with, follows him to Osaka. And it's kind of unclear to me if she has any romantic interest in him whatsoever. She just seems like...
No, I think she does.
I think she does, but it's like...
It's just like she knows that she is like...
She's like, I don't want to get married. I just
like,
want to help you be a better actor.
Well, she only says that she doesn't want to get married because she knows how scandalous it would be.
Right.
Like, she is very aware of her social station, and she got fired just because they were sharing a watermelon together, you know?
Yeah.
Like,
and she's like, what the heck? Why am I getting fired? And they're just like, you know.
But it seems like she finds a lot of meaning in like being able to express herself through like boosting up his career. The movie just is like, she has an extremely thankless situation in this movie.
Which is a thing that while watching the movie was really kind of turning me off to it. And then seem like kind of reading up on Mizuguchi's other work and this movie, that does seem like the point he's trying to make is that like this woman is sacrificing everything for this guy.
Yeah.
She's like being so sacrificial and getting nothing back in return.
Yeah,
really.
there are points where he's outright cruel to her.
Yeah.
But she still stands by him. Which, you know, it's an interesting thing for someone to do, you know? It's like it almost feels like, you know, why don't you just like cut your ties with this guy, you know?
Then it's like after I think it's like 5 years of him like on the like low rent Kabuki circuit, like just,
and we've all spent a few years on the low rent Kabuki circuit.
It's like he finally gets to like showcase his skills as a Kabuki performer.
Yeah. Skills of an artist.
Yeah. And like because of all of this time he spent with this woman where she's just been like, no, you need to like keep working at it, keep working at it, keep working at it. He's become a really good actor.
Yeah. Through her efforts,
right.
basically.
Exactly. Pretty much.
Or her encouragement and support.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the movie explicitly says, like, because of her, because of what she did, now he's a good actor. And so then now, because he's a good actor, now his family respects him again because they're like, hey, you're a good actor. We're into that. And then they find out that it's really all because of this woman that he fell in love with who's been like giving up her entire life to help him. And so they're like, oh, like it's all because of her. Go be with her. And so then he does go to be with her and she dies.
Yeah, too little too late.
And it is, I like, you know where it's going. Once it's like, oh, she's very sick. It's like, oh, she's gonna die. Like right away, right? But it's still, it's like the scene of them talking, like right before the end of the movie, where it's like both of them know that she's about to die.
Yeah.
But neither of them really want to say that. She kind of does. She's like, no, like I'm good. Like I'm happy that you're happy, kind of.
Yeah. And in her last moments, right? Like they are on paper in love with each other, right? Although he doesn't always act like it. Sometimes he does. I don't want to be too harsh to him. Like he abandons his family so that that's in a major part so that he can be with her. But then, a couple of years pass and he's just being mean. She is in this not as like an equal partner, but as someone who can only express excellence like through someone else. She's like sells a lot of her own objects to get him like a dressing table vanity mirror thing. And she's almost like, none of my stuff matters. Like,
Also,
it's all
she's the
about
only one
you,
who helps
you
the
know?
guy try to bring it up the stairs.
Yeah.
He does not help at all. Yeah, but I mean, also, I wonder how much of this is kind of the intended thesis of the movie. So when they're sort of like having this conversation as she is like minutes from
Yeah, that's
death,
right. Yeah.
he says, like, we can finally be happy both in art and life, right? Because it's like, oh, he's become a good actor. His family accepts him. If they can now just like live happily together, then it's like everything is cool.
Yeah.
But that doesn't happen because she dies. It makes me wonder if the point that Mizuguchi is trying to make is that like, no, you don't get both. Like, you want to be happy, you gotta like art and life are not. I don't know if that's his intention, where it's like you can't be happy in art and life. You have to sort of like trade off one or the other.
Yeah, I mean, I think another big idea of this is just like the way that like rigid social structures harm people.
Oh
from,
yeah,
like,
for sure.
From like it all turned out to not matter anyway, right? Like this whole thing happened because like they couldn't be associated with each other because like it's not done, and then like they just changed their mind and it's fine, you know.
Well, yeah, and even then, it's I don't know. There's also the thing where it's like she's dying and he has to leave because there's like a parade in his honor,
Yeah.
and she's like, no, like this is part of being an actor. Like you need to go.
Think of your public.
Yeah, it's like the fans need to see you and celebrate you. Like that's part of what is being a great actor is about. And so he leaves and he's like in a parade while she's dying.
Yeah.
And it's
And you can like see it on his face.
You can see
that
he's not enjoying that parade at all. Like how could you?
Yeah.
But it's this sort of thing like he is being celebrated and adored where it's like, oh my god, he is like the greatest kabuki theater performer we've ever seen. Like he's like the greatest artistic success you could possibly hope for.
Yeah.
And he's miserable because the woman he's in love with died.
Right. Like she was
a
sort
minute
of
ago.
what gave meaning to it for him.
Yeah.
Where like he was just kind of floating through life before having, you know, just a bunch of yes men around him, right? Yeah, and her last act is like yet another kind of selfless thing of like, you don't need to stay with me while I die. Go and stand in the parade because that's what you're supposed to do. You know?
Apparently, that is like a big recurring theme in all of Mizuguchi's work is the like suffering and sacrifice of women, often for the men in their lives. There was a little Criterion bonus thing on Criterion Channel, talking about that. One of the things that brought it up is there is sort of a pro and anti-feminist read of that, where it's like the thing. It was like, well, Mizuguchi is like having a lot of like complex female characters in his movies, but they're all suffering the entire time. Like they all just get like shit on forever. And that's like
right. And you know, this movie isn't directly really like advocating for anything. It's just showing you like, here's a way that people suffer. Here's a way that women suffer. Maybe kind of like blown up and dramatized here.
But there was definitely sort of towards the end of the movie, I'm like, is this movie like advocating for just like, hey, just sacrifice everything for the person you love, and then, you know, it'll be great.
It's like it works.
Right? But I think also like that last shot of him like at the front of the like float going down the canal is like he looks so miserable at the front of that parade. And it's it is the kind of thing where it's like, I do not think this movie is like advocating that he like succeeded in any real way.
Yeah. Speaking of him succeeding, one of the things that was kind of weird about this movie, or it's not even weird, it's not the movie's fault, it's just my fault for not knowing culture so well. But like there is this kind of scene that's like he's finally going to get his break to prove himself that he's not a bad actor anymore. And so it shows this like really extended scene of his kabuki performance. And I am looking at it the whole time going, I don't have enough context to understand
if this
whether
is good
this
or
is
not.
a good performance or not.
I thought the exact same thing. I'm like, I have no idea if this is, as an audience member, am I supposed to be like, damn, he's done it?
Yeah.
Or am I supposed to be like, woof, yikes?
Yeah, like this is kind of supposed to be this sort of like the end of Whiplash. Like he is like doing amazing stuff on the drums. But and like you're like, yes.
Yeah.
But for kabuki theater, But yeah, I have no idea what the difference between good and bad Kabuki acting
I mean, he
is,
was doing something.
because Kabuki acting is not naturalistic acting.
No,
you know?
it seems, from my understanding, it's like very dance adjacent or very dance heavy.
It did.
And
It did start with the kind of iconic Kabuki.
yeah,
kinda,
I don't know if they do masks in Kabuki or if that's just a no thing.
is no puppets? Isn't no puppets?
I thought no was masks.
I don't know.
We're advertising our ignorance right now. Again, like towards the end, there's the bit where like the kind of spoiled actor dad finally shows that he's like respects his son and his autonomy, where he finds out that Otoku, the woman he's in love with, and they've been living together for years at this point.
Mm-hmm.
He's like, no, like we can, like the parade can wait, like go see your wife.
Yeah.
And like that got me. I was like, oh.
Yeah, and then she goes like, "I can call you my husband now."
Yeah. Yeah, but yeah, this is not a cheery film.
No.
It does have, I mean, we've talked a lot about like formal like filmmaking stuff this episode, and I think this movie feels so different, sort of like stylistically, to the anything else
Yeah.
we watched.
Yeah.
There's basically no close-ups in this movie.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if there's a I don't think
There's
there
like
is a
one.
single one.
I feel like the only one I remember
There
is like a single insert shot of a piece of paper.
Right. Yeah. Again, apparently, like I'm learning most of what I know about Mizuguchi like this week from this movie. Apparently, he kind of hated close-ups and was like, close-ups are bad.
Mm-hmm.
Or at least at this point in his career, he'd already made like 50 to 100 movies by the time he made this. Crazy.
I do like how the kind of pulled back perspective mirrors the theatrical subject
I
matter.
thought about that. And also, it really makes you feel, especially in like kind of some of the more like intense scenes, it does kind of make you feel like you're really kind of privy to like a private moment between two people or between one person, like by
Mhm,
themselves. Like
mhm.
I think especially the scenes where someone is in a room by themselves,
Right.
and we're just kind of, wide shot of the whole room, and they come in, they like do their little business, and they kind of have a moment just with themselves, and it's like, this feels like I'm like hiding in the dresser or something. That it's like it's very intimate and kind of not necessarily uncomfortable, but it's just like you really feel, it's not
like observational.
right. We're not editing. We're not. It's not trying to like tell you what's happening in the scene. We're just watching a person in like have a moment, and those scenes I thought really worked very well. There's sort of mirroring scenes between Kiku, who's the actor, and Otoku.
Otoku. It's in the back of my mind the whole time.
I know. Where they each are sort of like sitting in a room having this kind of, this is after they've been living together, but they've separated because he's become a successful actor again, or
Kind
for
of
the
keeps
first time.
happening back and forth.
Yeah, but it's like she like set up this whole thing for him to get like an acting showcase, knowing that if it works, then they will have to separate.
Mm-hmm.
And she's like, yes, no, that I know that going in, I'm gonna do it anyway. And so then like she just goes home, like, and like there's no lights on. She just kind of comes into the room and like sits.
It's sad. Yeah.
And it's like, oh, you feel it.
Yeah.
And then there's like the next scene is like people are celebrating. It's like, oh yeah, like he's back. He's a great actor now.
Kiku's done it.
But then it's like we're watching that in a wide, and like the camera really slowly just like moves over, and even like the sound starts to move away. Like it's like we're hearing it from the next room, all these people laughing and celebrating, and we see Kiku just like sitting by himself as like people are laughing in the next room.
Right.
And it's like, oh, I don't know. For whatever reason like that, I was like, oh, I've been there. I've like been in a situation where there's like people laughing in another room, and I'm like having a moment where I'm just like, I do not feel cheery.
It's like that meme, like they don't know that I'm sad about my dying wife.
That's basically. But like that's a thing where I feel like this style of being like very restrained and very just like almost every scene in this movie is like a single shot. There's like very, very few edits in the entire thing. it will occasionally cut to different angles of things just to reveal more information about something. But it's
not
like
Birdman style, but like every
every scene. Every scene tends
yeah.
to be like the camera's on a tripod or like locked off, and it's like
Yeah.
everything is happening in one shot.
And it doesn't mind like taking its time too. Like there's a scene where they
Yeah.
just like slice up a watermelon and eat it in
Yeah.
real time, you know?
Exactly. But it's like even that is the kind of thing where because it happens in real time, it has this kind of like immediacy or just like intimacy to it, where it's I kind of feel like I'm just sitting here eating watermelon with them, you know?
That's nice. I like that.
Yeah, it kind of reminded me of the scene in was it A Ghost Story where Rooney Mara eats a whole pie. You seen that?
I haven't seen that. I've
There's
seen
a scene
I've
where
seen
Rooney Mara
Jean
eats a whole
Dielman,
pie.
Where she
I haven't. I gotta watch that. That's only what 6 hours long.
yeah, something like that. Yeah, I mean, I guess like Ozu and Mizuguchi both kind of known for this sort of dispassionate, pulled back, like restrained filmmaking, you know, or like camera work at least.
A lot of like dolly moves in this movie. A lot of kind of
yes,
but they all feel very deliberate. Like whenever the camera does move, it's like, oh, we're seeing something now, or or it's moving like with people like through a space.
Yeah, but often it's like revealing something new when the camera's moving.
Sometimes we hear a character speak off screen first, and then the camera will like slowly come around, and we see who's talking.
Yeah,
I love that stuff. I don't know. At the end of this movie, when it's like, oh yeah, she died, like credits, I just out loud to no one just said, "Damn, dude."
The last thing that I have to say about this movie is that they bought wind chimes at 2 a.m. There was like an outdoor wind chime salesman.
Yeah, like a wind chime cart.
A wind chime sale.
They went to the wind chime truck.
They're like, hey, they made a mention of saying it's 2 a.m.
Yeah.
Do you want to buy a wind chime? I don't know. Maybe the people are out and about real late those days.
Turn of the century Japan.
Meiji era.
Maybe that was just how things went. I didn't find out a lot of information about it. I am curious just like what it was like making movies in Japan as they were like going to war.
Yeah.
In various places. Because Japan was already at war with China at this point.
Oh yeah. All right. Yeah, the only thing that I know about existing in that period of Japan is Barefoot Gen, just from the comic book Barefoot Gen that I read. But that's not...
It's not relevant?
It's not... well, it's not real, you know?
Oh, well... Well, did you have a favorite film of this? I think I know what yours was.
Wizard of Oz.
Yeah. What do you think mine was? It was Stagecoach. Yeah. It was Stagecoach.
Nice.
I feel like both of us were pretty clear just when we were talking about those of like, yeah, with this we like this one the most.
Spoilers.
Yeah, Wizard of Oz and Stagecoach, 2 great movies. Like,
yeah,
I think I was a little. I think
they're both on Ebert's great movies.
Yeah,
list.
I think I was a little kind of lukewarm on Wizard of Oz, not because of any like failings of the movie. It was just sort of like it was hard for me to like get into it a little bit, just because it was just like so.
It's too ubiquitous.
Yeah, and it's just like it's hard to even like think of it outside of just this like general like cultural language of like, oh yeah, Wizard of Oz stuff.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there probably isn't going to be a movie that's that bad about that for a long time.
Yeah.
But we're going to be watching a lot of classic movies.
Yeah.
So.
Early 40s has some real bangers coming up. So, but we got to do it. We got to do our 30s decade in review before that.
That's the next episode.
Yeah.
So it's not a see you next year situation. It's a let's reminisce on the last 10 years.
Yeah. Yeah, but we'll get our top 10s drawn up.
Oh, I don't. I got to figure mine out.
I don't have mine, but I mean,
okay,
like, I'm excited to figure out what mine are and to see what yours are. So
yeah, and I hope you're excited because everyone loves a top 10 list. Am I right? It would be clickbait if we actually wrote top 10 in the titles, but we don't.
We don't. Yeah, maybe we should. with a big arrow and us like, whoa.
Yeah. All right, that's about it for this episode. Yeah. Thanks again to Nat for joining. Make sure you check out her YouTube channel, which we will link in all the relevant places. And yeah, thanks for listening, subscribing, all that stuff. You know.
Yeah. If you're listening as a podcast, we also have a like YouTube version of it where we like have little clips and like posters and little factoids and things occasionally.
Yeah.
And if we're watching on YouTube, then if you want to, whatever,
If you
listen
want to hear us
to
in
it
your car.
in the car. Yeah. It's also a podcast.
Yes. All right. Well, that'll do it.
All right.
Glenn, I'll see you next
year.
Please, sir, we've done what you told us. We brought you the broomstick of the Wicked Witch of the West. We melted her.